This boy was the final candidate to face the admission trial. For him, this so-called academy test was a mere formality. Nothing before him posed a true threat to his power. Ban had already faced such monsters countless times before, and his unique talent was to grow stronger with every kill. Each time he defeated a formidable foe, he could even assimilate their diverse elemental powers. He was ice-guide into a different plane of existence, where this unique school was forged, with the objective of forging the ultimate warriors, so that they might one day conquer the Tower of Babel. Ban Yuan. He was still ignorant of how this strange world operated, but he remembered an old book he read as a boy that described the legend of that very tower. He accepted the trial and dominated everything effortlessly, as if it were a game, the moment he won. He was warped instantly into the academy grounds, arriving just moments before the opening ceremony began. The students stared in shock, because the window for new arrivals had already closed. But their awe turned to mockery upon seeing he was human. Then Ban realized this academy was not built for mankind. Here, a multitude of powerful races convened, and to make matters far more dire, his eyes saw their stats, and their power was godlike. A faction of humans then gestured toward him, informing him that lesser beings must sit in the rear. His seat was with the outcasts, the so-called weaklings. But Ban perceived a startling truth. These individuals who were meant to be the weakest possessed utterly monstrous hidden potential. That man was a threat, and that woman a demon, and the other stats eclipsed every other person present. Until this moment, Ban believed he was a monster. But now, he knew he had to ascend much higher to match them. He presented himself to a young woman named Rachel. She was so lovely, he was momentarily lost in her grace. He then turned to greet another girl, but her gaze was sharp and piercing. Unlike the gentle Rachel, the reality was she was intrigued by the relic concealed on her hero's arm. He revealed his partner, Eva, a sentient artifact. This girl's name was revealed as Dako Yun, the child of a great Murin martial artist, which made Yuan wonder if she practiced martial arts and used her ki to generate explosions. His comment was met with laughter. The girl blushed deeply, admitting he was not entirely wrong. The blonde-haired young man was called Slight, and it appeared that he and Rachel were the only true humans. But their conversation was cut short. A brilliant radiance interrupted their talk. The high ceiling split open as a great sound descended. Every student was pinned down by a crushing pressure. Rachel, Slight, and Ban experienced true primal fear. The oppressive force was immense. Yuan knew it came from above, but he couldn't grasp the source of this power. This was the dawn of the 25th. 57th entrance ceremony for the Grand Union Academy. I offer my congratulations to you all. Later, the 4 special admission students stood in Professor Yumina's office. She inquired if they found the headmaster's address inspiring. A heavy, uncomfortable silence descended upon them. To break the tension, Yuan spoke. It was truly profound. But that massive eye, was that the headmaster? Yumina's surprise was clear. Dako Yun thought to herself that the headmaster's form was cloaked in potent magic. So how did this strange newcomer perceive him? Yamina then confirmed that it was. That was the headmaster, a being who rarely reveals himself. She then focused her gaze upon Yuan and told him he would have a private audience with the headmaster sometime later. Next, she turned her attention to the entire group, stating she was the professor assigned to their special unit for the next 5 years. Her words were absolute. Their glory would be her own, so they were expected to excel. She warned them to beware of the jealousy and scorn from the general student body. They would be seen as pretenders who did not earn their place. Stay united, she commanded them, because from this day forward, you are a party that will scale the tower together. To conclude, she revealed the academy had bestowed a welcome gift upon them. A blinding light enveloped the chamber, and within each of their grasps, a necklace bearing a sigil materialized. "Is this our student identification?" asked Slight. Yamina replied that the pendant was far greater. It's an ID and a key to all facilities, and also a personal teleportation artifact. To prove it, Slight unknowingly activated the strange pendant, and in the briefest instant, Dako Yun and Rachel vanished and returned to the same spot. Utterly disoriented, Yamina simply smiled and declared the pendant was their only access to the tower, so they had better guard it with their lives. The trio departed the room, baffled as to why Yuan remained. Dako Yun, ever the strategist, had already deduced the answer. It was likely because he was the sole person who gazed directly at the headmaster's true presence. The scene shifts. Yuan sat, diminished, within an impossibly large throne, inside a silent and truly imposing chamber. He could only assume that he had done something wrong. To warrant this strange private audience, a potent and ancient voice resonated through the space. It came from a figure shrouded deep within the shadows. Bon Yuvan, spoke the headmaster. Look upon me. There is no need for you to be afraid. After all, this is not my original body. In the great hall, Yuan continued to stare at the ground, overwhelmed by the headmaster's suffocating aura. The timeless, ancient voice echoed once more. It is fine. You may raise your gaze to me. With great reluctance, he finally lifted his head, and the sight left him bewildered. The headmaster's grand throne was completely empty. Instead, perched upon the desk, was a simple stuffed doll. The voice emanated directly from it. Should I call you headmaster, or perhaps chancellor? Yuan directed the question at the doll. The response he received was immediate and direct. You may simply call me master. The master then stated the purpose of their meeting. He claimed he rarely meddles in a student's journey. If they're destined to be weak, then so be it. His singular desire is to witness for himself, the one who will at last ascend to the tower's apex. Yuan absorbed this information without a word. For the master, it was mere entertainment. But for him, the tower was his ancestral birthright, something he would gladly offer his own life for. What did its conquest mean to the others? Why had so many come here with that one shared ambition, shattering the long silence? He looked at the doll and posed the most vital question. What is the true nature of the tower? The stuffed doll paused for a second before answering. The tower is the gateway to divinity, a form of divine trial. The reply echoed in Yuan's mind as he wondered if divine meant gods or was something else entirely. Before he could fall too deep into thought, the master continued, declaring that he saw within Yuan the most potential he had seen in millennia, and for this reason alone, he would make an exception to his code of non-intervention. The doll gestured with its cloth arm at Yuan, and in that moment, the ID pendant inside his coat began to radiate intensely. What is this power? The protagonist asked, alarmed. The master revealed he had expanded his authority, granting him total access to any dungeon beyond the academy, so he could sharpen his power before attempting the tower. Outside the academy? Yuan asked in confusion, but his query was interrupted by a portal opening at his feet, which began to pull him into its depths. As he fought to maintain his footing, the master bestowed upon him one final decree. If your growth proves to be exceptional, I shall grant you even greater permissions. What permissions? He demanded to know, as he was being consumed by the darkness. The final words he heard were from the master's doll. The right to challenge the great tower by yourself. I shall be watching with great interest. The journey was blinding. Yuan tumbled from the portal, landing on something quite soft. How was your meeting with the headmaster? A kind voice inquired. As he looked up, he found he was in the lap of a professor with floral hair, an act that made him leap to his feet. His face burning red, she laughed and told him, the headmaster always dismisses his guests in that manner. She then examined Yuan's ID, and her eyes went wide. Impossible, she muttered in disbelief. The headmaster granted a student leave from the academy. She detailed the incredible fortune he now held, the freedom to conquer dungeons at his will, and grow stronger, free from the school's many rules. Only then did he see it was not a trial for his weakness. It was a gift recognizing his great potential. The professor let out a sigh of envy and, with a kind smile, suggested he should pay a visit to a city named Ronica, known for its magnificent and ancient temple. Sometime after, we find Yuan on a long cobblestone path. A massive city loomed just over the horizon. He recalled the kind professor's only request, for a bottle or two of fine wine as a souvenir, and he smiled. The knowledge had been a fair exchange. His thoughts then turned to the final words he shared with his grandfather. In his memory, the old man gave him a small, heavy sack and asked him if he had made his preparations. Within the sack, a small fortune in gold bars shone. This is the treasure of our forefathers, his grandfather had told him with a calm smile. Gold is a currency that is valued in every world. Carrying such a heavy burden would have once been a risk, but with his new inventory, it was the ideal preparation. He removed a few of the bars, feeling the weight of both his lineage and destiny in his hand. At last, he entered the great city gates. Ronica was a sprawling, advanced metropolis, where ancient wonder met with modern magical technology. Flying vehicles and bikes soared across the skyline, and Yuan could only stare at them, stunned. Lost in the moment, he was stopped by two city guards. Their wary glares quickly changed to ones of deep respect. Once they saw the Academy's crest upon his shoulder, they gave a salute and said that the city's peace is kept, thanks to the protection of the Academy and the Chancellor. Noticing that he was a new arrival, the guards offered their aid with whatever he may need. Anything at all? Yuan replied. A cunning smirk began to form across his face. He then raised his hand toward the skies, pointing to a flying motorcycle as it streaked past. I must have one of those, he declared. His expression gleamed. What is the price? Far beyond the Academy, Yuan soared through the skies of Ronica, pushing his new flying motorcycle across the vast fields, and diving from high cliffs just to feel the rush of wind. The experience was one of pure, unbridled freedom. The purchase itself had been on a whim, but a whim that he already knew was well worth it. When he inquired with the guard about its cost, they told him the standard model was 250,000 ranis. Yuan, with no concept of this world's currency, simply drew forth one of his gold bars and asked its value. The guard's response was one of pure disbelief. That one single bar of gold, he soon learned, was worth more than 7 million ranis. As he soared through the air, Eva, his trusted, serpentine living weapon, materialized right there upon his shoulder. Thrilled, he asked her what she thought of his new ride. He had enchanted the flying bike with the concepts of demon and ghost, transforming it into its own living artifact, a sister for Eva, which he had decided to name Lilith. The two appear to be friends, and they explored this new world. Back inside the Academy, freedom became a pounding headache. Yuan was collapsed upon the table, while Slight glared at him with an expression of pure rage. I am truly let down, the blonde-haired boy said, as he placed a glass of water down before him. The source of his rage was that after their first team meeting, Yuan had simply vanished without any explanation. He apologized, placing the blame on the professor's insistence to drink, but Slight did not appear to believe him. What is that? Asked Dako Yun. The silver-haired girl gestured at a new badge on Yuan's uniform. He stated, somewhat bashfully, that he was named class president. Slight appeared to approve of this new appointment, but Dako Yun interrupted him without a second thought. I'm the strongest here. That title should belong to me, she announced, staring daggers right at Yuan. Slight grew furious at her bold proclamation. You constantly act as if you are the greatest. He shot back at her. The verbal battle escalated. When Dako Yun revealed she knew all about Slight's secret ambition to try and scale the Great Tower alone. Exposed, the young swordsman could only stammer, while Rachel, the girl with the pink hair, observed the entire scene with a curious gaze, weary of the conflict and his own pain. Yuan rested his tired head upon the table. He took a moment to assess his new party, Slight, a prideful and naive young lion, Dako Yun, a fierce wildcat who invited conflict, and Rachel, a gentle, loyal hound. Sighing, he raised a hand to capture their attention. The class representative does not have to be the strongest, he reasoned. If that were the case, they would simply make every choice on their own. A leader's true purpose is to unite their allies. After a lengthy argument, Dako Yun at last relented. She rose to her feet and looked Yuan over from head to toe, accepting the outcome. But you should know this, she spoke, with a piercing look aimed right at Slight. To achieve our goals, we must sometimes tolerate the useless. As she departed, Slight was visibly shaking with rage, and Yuan could only wonder how he would ever make these two rivals work as a team. Taking advantage of the new calm, Rachel came closer to him with a curious expression. Hey, Yuan, what happened to that cute little white snake? Yuan's first test as a leader began with a new trial. During their very first combat training session, in an arena shared with the other classes, a stone-skinned student from Class 1 began to taunt the professor, the general students, who despised the special admission students for the favor shown to them, erupted, all demanding a chance to battle them. Yuan simply feigned ignorance of the situation, but Slight had already anticipated this outcome, knowing the deep-seated hatred the others had for them. Amidst all of the rising tension, the stone student, who was named Erector, saw Professor Yumina's sigil on Yuan's uniform, a sign of his high status. Enraged at seeing such an honor on a weakling, he roared, demanding to be the first one to fight him. The professor, finding this conflict to be amusing, turned his cold gaze directly upon Yuan. Very well, the professor declared to the entire arena. Bon Yuan, you have been chosen as Erector's opponent. At the same time, inside her own office, Professor Yamina reviewed the documents for the joint class session. Her face was one of pure shock. A practical combat trial between classes on the very first day. It was an unbalanced and truly foolish decision, and she wondered who could have crafted such a hostile lesson plan. Back inside the combat training arena, the substitute professor was declaring the official match, and Yuan simply raised a hand with a confident expression. He attempted to show his respect. Professor, with all due reverence, my own abilities are not meant for direct combat. The professor pushed up his glasses with a smirk. Preposterous. -3 points from your final grade for pathetic excuses. It was obvious the professor's goal was to shame him. Thinking on his feet, Yuan tried a different tact. I earned my place in special admission for my unique talents, which do not involve engaging in a direct fight. This attempt to evade the fight only angered the professor more, who then screamed that he would not abide such disrespect. -5 points. Yuan raised his hand up one more time. Very well. I will fight, he declared, much to the arena's shock. But I demand 1 week to prepare. I assure you I will be ready. His words were met with a moment of stunned silence. Then, whispers and jeering laughter from the watching crowd. To them, it was the admission of a true coward. A young woman with blue hair and a witch's hat observed him, unsure if he could truly achieve anything in 7 days. The substitute professor, however, saw this as a perfect opportunity. With a cruel smirk, he agreed. Wonderful. The duel between Ban Yuan and Erector is set for 1 week's time. And to make sure that everyone can witness, it will be streamed live on the Academy's official website. This was exactly what the man desired. A grand, public humiliation. Yuan stared at his foe, the stone behemoth known as Erector, and engaged his eyes. His opponent's stats were absurd. 5 times his own health and 10 times his physical power. It was a truly impossible gap. And yet, inside his own mind, a new strategy had already begun to take shape. As he schemed, he saw the concerned faces of Slight and Rutchel. He knew he had to grow stronger to stand beside these titans. Suddenly, he spied Dako Yun warming up at the edge of the field. She faced Class 1 and spoke with an ice-cold tone. You wish to witness the power of the special admission students? Very well. My specialty is combat. Who will be the first? Yuan analyzed her and was speechless. Her stats were so immense that his eyes could not even read them. She was a true SS rank monster. The arrogance of Class 1 faded in a single moment. The very same crowd that had been screaming for a battle was now paralyzed in a state of terrified silence. Tired of the delay, Dako Yun pointed right at Erector. With a hungry smirk, she beckoned to him with one finger. You, the one with the loudest bark, step forward. I will shatter you. The stone giant was frozen in place. Sweat fell down his rocky skin. His challenge was for the seemingly fragile newcomer, not this walking disaster in the shape of a woman. Yuan knew that if this battle were to happen, his rival would not be able to fight their duel in a week. Though he had no love for the man known as Erector, Yuan rushed over to his special classmate. Do not fight him. He is my opponent 1 week from now. Dako Yun looked at him, surprised by his plea. I am merely standing up for you, she told him. He expressed his thanks for her kind gesture, but replied to her with a firm resolve. I must prove my own value with my own strength. Please respect my wishes. A curious smile played on her lips. I believe you are just a man with a few clever plans. Perhaps I have misjudged you. Happy with his reply, she faced the silent crowd one final time. Is there anyone else? She demanded, but every student there avoided her gaze. You snarl like a pack of rabid dogs, but when the cage door is finally opened, you flee with your tails tucked between your legs. The shame only fueled the hatred of the regular students. From high up in the stands, a new, powerful, and arrogant voice echoed through the arena. Who are you calling a dog, little girl? Everyone turned to see a blond man with great, imposing horns, who radiated a truly overwhelming aura of raw power. It is always the weaklings who must travel in packs, he announced with a look of pure contempt, barking loudly to defend their pathetic group. Tiny dogs are truly a pitiful display. Dako Yun's focus shifted entirely to this new foe, and a new, far more dangerous battle was about to commence. The Horned Man smirked with an undeniable arrogance, positive that no one here could stand against it. But Yuan saw something far more dire. This man's raw power was on an entirely different level, even compared to the other prodigies. Who is he? Yuan asked, and Slight replied with a worried tone. That is Ortima, regent of the great Katui's dimension. He is a member of one of the 10 great families that reign over all of the highest-ranking dimensions. As Ortima descended from his place in the stands, even his own allies appear to be on edge. He strode up to the substitute professor. and demanded that the fight be sanctioned as official. The professor, wearing a truly evil expression, produced a small recording device. He intends to stream it all on the Academy's internet. Slide explained, and his surprise was doubled. Wenjuan not only knew what the internet was, but also produced a device from his own inventory and began to access the Academy's official channel. Rachel and Slight gathered close around, amazed as they saw the screen of the live broadcast. The professor's smug expression made his plan apparent, to bring public shame upon the special admission group. But Yuan gazed upon Dako Yun, who already stood at the center of the fighting arena, and knew things would not go as the professor had hoped. The two powerful warriors faced one another. Their auras were already warping the very air around them. You may have the first move, Ortima said with a sneer. Dako Yun held up a hand in a gesture of dismissal. You're the newcomer in this place. I will grant you that honor. Offended, Ortima raised up his hand, and with a voice that boomed with power, he commanded simply, kneel. A tidal wave of unseen power erupted from his form, a crushing wave that did not only strike Dako Yun, but washed over the entire combat arena. In the stands, students were knocked from their own seats. Slight felt the air being forced from his own lungs, as if he were being slowly crushed. Rachel, in her terror, gripped Yuan's arm, her body shaking. That is a distortion of the natural law. Yuan muttered, and Slight stared at him, stunned by his incredible perception. But at the epicenter of it all, Dako Yun stood there, completely still and unaffected, a dark and terrifying energy. A killing intent that felt like sharp glass in the air erupted from her with a simple yet elegant hand sign. She negated Ortima's pressure as if it were a mere gust of wind. The professor's jaw hung open in shock. Ortima's own party was rendered totally speechless. Even Yuan, who already knew of her great strength, understood her power was even greater than he had believed. Your power is as absurd as those horns on your head, she replied, her voice as cold as ice. In the blink of an eye, she vanished, reappearing before Ortima, and delivered a crushing kick right into his stomach. Caught off guard, he could barely raise his arms up to defend. The force of the blow sent him skidding backward. You will not use that pathetic trick a second time, she warned him, and then the hunt was on. What came next was a complete slaughter. Dako Yun moved about like a phantom, graceful and utterly deadly. Her strikes were a blinding flurry of attacks that Ortima, who was used to winning with his immense raw power, could not react to. He attempted a counterattack, but his strikes were sluggish and easy to predict. She evaded his attack with ease, answering with a swift kick to his jaw that sent him reeling. She is overwhelming a regent, Slight said in pure disbelief. You want to observe it all, not with shock, but with a cold and calculating analysis. His ability is meant to paralyze his opponent's movements, but has no effect on her. He is not used to fighting with his own body. Slight turned to look at him, impressed. How could he see such details in the middle of such a fast-paced battle? Ortima felt more and more disgraced with every blow he received. Is that all you can do? Run your pathetic mouth? She mocked him as she evaded another clumsy, desperate swing, pushed beyond his limits. Ortima's rational mind shattered with a roar of absolute fury. He unleashed the full extent of his aura. His eyes burned with a raging fire. How dare you shame me in this way? He roared, his energy detonating all around him. I will never forgive you. You will pay for this insult with your life. Facing this storm of raw power and pure hatred, Dako Yun just returned his gaze with the same coldness. A challenging look, prepared for whatever was to come. Facing Ortima's uncontrollable fury, Dako Yun maintained her composure, a predator awaiting the perfect chance to strike. That is a concept someone like you should not speak of so freely, she said, as her own deadly aura began to materialize. Preparing herself for a final counter, she readied herself to press her advance, but was stopped by the sound of applause echoing through the arena. It was Professor Yamina, who had just entered the battlefield. With her arrival, the hostile auras of the two fighters vanished, and a wide field of flowers bloomed from the stone floor, filling the space with the sweet aroma of the springtime. Stunned, the two powerful fighters watched the petals fall around them. With a peaceful smile, but with undeniable power in her voice, Yamina admonished them. The Academy does not permit needless battles. You must save that power for the tower. Enraged and utterly humiliated, Ortima ground his teeth, turned his back on the group, and left without another word of respect. Yamina savored the praise. Yamina beamed as Dako Yun rejoined her comrades. What was your assessment of that clash? She asked Yuan, who said witnessing it was a huge game. But his words were cut off by a sudden force to his back. Alarmed, he spun around to find Rachel there. She was shaking uncontrollably from the terror, using him as a human shield from Dako Yun's presence. He tried to soothe her, while the silver-haired warrior watched, unaware of the sheer dread her powerful aura created. Still on the battlefield, Yamina was openly reprimanding the substitute professor, declaring his conduct to be utterly reprehensible, and that a mere apology would not suffice for his actions. Then, she elegantly approached our protagonist. She gestured to the leader's pin on his uniform and with a touch, straightened it. For a class representative, prestige is paramount, she stated with a sly wink. The move was so effortless and familiar. It ignited a storm of jealous and wrathful stares from all the other male students nearby. Yuan sighed. Instead of helping matters, the professor had only fanned the flames of their envy. Following the fight, the rumors spread like a plague. The footage the professor uploaded to disgrace them had achieved the exact opposite. The recording revealed Dako Yun's absolute mastery over Urtima, and the online comments section erupted. Soon, two names became the focus of all discussion. Dako Yun, now hailed as the Silver Queen, and Yuan, the master negotiator, who skillfully bargained for time before his own duel. His brief exchange with Professor Yamina at the video's end only gave rise to even more speculation. In the special admission, students were now the Academy's most famous icons. Reading the feed with his companions, Yuan chuckled. Seated next to him, Slight struggled to understand the internet jargon. Utterly bewildered, "It's no surprise they're all discussing us," said Dako Yun before she dropped a bombshell. But that boy, Urtima, was not the strongest in his class. She recalled the blue-haired girl in the witch's hat. There was one other person there who was more powerful than him. Yuan conceded he hadn't seen, as he was focused on her fight. Their discussion was cut short, as they saw Rachel was sitting far away, still terrified of Dako Yun and unable to approach her. Seeing this untenable state of affairs, especially since they were assigned as roommates, Yuan knew he had to intervene. He reached into his inventory. "I believe I have a solution for this," he declared. It was a container of rare elixir jelly. The moment he broke the seal, an impossibly sweet and alluring scent filled the chamber. Rachel's head immediately shot up. Her gaze was locked upon the jar. Yuan applied the golden jelly to a piece of bread, and then offered it to his party. Slight and Dako Yun took a sample, and their eyes grew wide. "This is incredible," the blonde swordsman proclaimed. Even Dako Yun's icy resolve seemed to thaw for a moment. "This is amazing," she managed to say, smiling. Yuan turned and gestured toward Rachel, who was at this point practically salivating. "Come and join us." With some hesitation, she came closer and accepted a piece of the bread. As she experienced the very first bite, her expression became one of pure, unadulterated joy. The exquisite taste and the tranquilizing nature of the elixir began to quell her fear. As Rachel enjoyed her piece of bread, Yuan gave another portion to Dako Yun. "Consider this a payment," he told her nonchalantly. Hearing the word payment, Dako Yun's demeanor shifted. She rose to her feet with a sudden resolve in her gaze. Before Yuan could say a word, she seized him by his necktie, yanking his face close to hers, while he still held a piece of jelly bread in his hand. "In return for this jelly," she stated with an unexpected intensity, "I will grant you a private lesson in the martial arts." Before Yuan could even respond, the world around him shifted. They were now in a Spartan dojo, a reflection of the focused and disciplined state of her mind. Dako Yun selected a wooden practice sword. "Do not make any careless moves," she warned. And with one swift motion, the blade sliced through the air, generating a powerful gust of wind. She then settled into a combat-ready stance, and in the next moment, a crushing pressure erupted from her. She lunged forward. Her movement was just a blur, a flawless thrust, so rapid that it displaced the air before it, stopping the sword's point just inches from Yuan's face. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable, absorbing everything that had just occurred. "This," she declared, "is a thrust, a single strike, without a trace of fear or any second thoughts." For him, it was almost beyond belief that a mortal could perform an act with such perfection. But in that instant, his power did more than simply witness. It learned. A new concept was born in his mind, penetration, as he was lost deep in his thoughts, attempting to grasp why he had learned that particular concept. Dako Yun brought him back to the present moment. Focus. A thrust does not only have one single form. She then began to perform a series of strikes in the air. Each one was slightly different from the one before it. "How many times must you make the thrust?" With what amount of power? What should you replicate? There are an endless number of factors, she stated, but the final foundation is just one, where only a single, perfect thrust is required. You must never forget that. Her words and motions, which had mastered a concept to its most perfect form, were filled with the very essence of truth. She offered him the sword. Now it is your turn. As he took the wooden blade, Yuan requested that she not laugh at his poor copy. If you could copy me flawlessly on your first attempt. She smirked. My 10 years of brutal training would be for nothing. He moved, replicating the stance and strike she had shown him. The instant his own thrust sliced through the air, Dako Yun's confident smirk completely faded. She could not fathom it. He had somehow understood the core of her perfect strike, just by witnessing it a single time. But Yuan was displeased. He sensed that something was still missing. Until this point, he had always blended different concepts, but her training revealed his grave error. He had to master and refine each concept individually. Removing his shirt to allow for greater freedom of motion, he focused his mind. He repeated the strike, thinking, why penetration? The answer came to him like a bolt of lightning. Because the original wielder, Dako Yun, believes with her entire being that the true nature of thrust is to pierce the target. With this new revelation in mind, he poured all his focus, will, and power into one attack. The outcome was on an entirely different level. The strike that passed through the air was infinitely stronger, as if both he and the sword had become the living incarnation of the concept of thrust. Halt! She commanded him, seeing the great effort drain his strength. He collapsed down to his knees, gasping for air as a wave of system alerts filled his mind. Martial arts concept acquired. Swordsman concept, absorbed as a subconcept. He reviewed his stats, and his jaw fell open. His core attributes had increased massively. The swordsman concept, which had barely changed before, had grown exponentially. His combat power had literally doubled. I never imagined I could be surpassed in this way, she said, her voice filled with awe. Embarrassed, he rubbed his head and said he was only mimicking, and that he learned so fast because she was a master teacher. Her praise seemed to catch her by surprise, and she turned away from him to conceal the red on her cheeks. Satisfied, Yuan expressed his thanks and offered her an elixir. A single elixir is not enough to pay for this lesson, she stated, and he felt a wave of tension, unsure what else he could possibly offer her. Sensing his anxiety, she gave a small smile. Do not fret, she said with a mischievous look in her eyes. I will collect on my payment over time. You should be prepared. With the mood now completely different, she reminded him of their next class, and they teleported away. Yuan was still pondering her mysterious smirk when the scene shifted to the academy's great hallways. Rutschel and Slight were walking, absorbed by a strange device. Suddenly, Rutschel collided with a group of other students, with venomous glares and a threatening presence. The leader of the rival group slammed his fist on the wall, barring her way. Where do you think you're headed, little girl? He asked, a cruel sneer spreading across his face. The aggressor continued to obstruct their path. But Rutschel, though clearly quite irritated, did not allow herself to be cowed by his threats. Witnessing this, Slight acted instantly, stepping between them. What is your business with my party member? He demanded, his voice as cold as steel. The bully shot him a look of pure annoyance. Get out of my way, you pathetic insect. At that very same moment, Yuan and Dako Yun materialized in the hallway. The sudden appearance of the now legendary Silver Queen changed the odds. Recognizing the warrior who had so utterly crushed Ortima, the group of thugs immediately fell back and fled, but not before issuing a final, cowardly threat. This time, Rutschel hid herself behind Slight, offering her thanks for his quick defense. Yuan saw the simmering rage in his friend's expression. This confrontation was far from over. Moments later, in class, an old professor was giving a lecture on the Union's history. But for the gang of aggressors, the class was a chance to resume their campaign of torment. Covertly, they began to take photos of Rutschel, whispering cruel and wicked comments among themselves. The young woman attempted to ignore them, but her anguish and pain were clear to see. Both Slight and Yuan felt their own fury begin to boil. It made no difference what world. Yuan mused. The evil of man was always a constant. No longer able to restrain his rage, Slight abruptly shot to his feet, catching the old professor's attention. Pardon me, but certain students are disrupting the lesson. The old professor simply demanded their silence, and without giving it a second thought, continued with his boring explanation. Seeing this, the bullies began to mock Slight under their breath, calling him a fool and saying he was trying to look cool. The taunting grew worse when they asked if he and Rachel were an item. That was enough for silent tears to begin falling down her face. It was the final straw. With a loud crack, Slight snapped a pencil between his fingers, prepared to erupt. But before he could even rise, a steady hand was placed upon his shoulder. It was Yuan. Calm yourself, he whispered with intensity. Slight replied in utter disbelief. Making a scene in this place will only make it worse, Yuan said, revealing his phone's display. Just observe. On the screen, a live broadcast on UnionTuber was run. Slight understood at once, and a cruel smirk played on his lips. He turned to the thugs and spoke with a loud voice. Keep on laughing, if you please. The viewers are enjoying it. Baffled, they glanced around them and saw no one. What they were not aware of was that directly behind them, little Eva was holding a camera inside her mouth, capturing every single word and every laugh from the start. In moments, the live stream chat section was flooded with thousands of messages expressing pure outrage. A fine move, Dako Yun said quietly to Yuan, who only replied, they picked a fight with one of us. They would not be getting away with it. When a trio of fools finally understood what was happening, it was already far too late. They tried to conceal themselves and frantically searched for the camera until one of them finally spotted the tiny, white serpent. But before they could even get close to her, Eva vanished in the blink of an eye. The commotion finally caught the professor's eye, who, this time, had finally run out of patience. Your names, and get out of my classroom now, he roared as the trio was being thrown out of the class. The professor grumbled that he would fail them for the semester. Yuan believed this punishment was too lenient, but Rachel, looking much more at ease, did not agree. It was sufficient, she said, thanking them both with a true smile. I am all right now, because of you. The moment of thanks united them. Even Dako Yun displayed a rare, almost unseen smile. They all agreed things were better with Yuan as class leader, but their newfound peace was short-lived. When the class had finally concluded, the three expelled thugs were lying in wait in the main hall. Afraid, Rachel quickly took cover behind Yuan. The party's frustration returned with a vengeance. This time, the aggressors were not unarmed. They were all brandishing weapons, facing the blades aimed at them. Slight stepped forward with a dangerous expression. What is it you want? Confronting the three armed aggressors, Slight was completely unmoved. Their leader demanded a reason for the shame of their public recording, which, as they claimed, had destroyed their final grades. Yuan looked over and saw the substitute professor, watching from afar and doing absolutely nothing to stop them, even after seeing that his students were wielding weapons. It was contempt for the lower worlds in its most blatant form. The shouting and threats began once more. But Slight, with a terrifyingly calm expression, simply stared at them and uttered a single word, barbarians. This final insult was the breaking point. Their leader charged toward him, his own sword drawn. What did you just say, you pathetic, inferior being? In a flash, Slight drew forth his own personal sword. With a fluid, almost dismissive motion, an arc of golden energy sliced through the air. The aggressor's weapon was split in half. The broken blade sent flying. The shock was absolute. Yuan, analyzing the attack with his special eyes, saw the golden power that coated Slight's weapon, and learned yet another new concept. Meanwhile, the bully was frozen, paralyzed with fear. Slight pressed his advance, placing his blade on the boy's throat, who then collapsed to his knees, utterly terrified. If you had simply asked me with respect, Slight said, his voice like cold steel, I might have considered talking. His personality had shifted entirely, becoming cold, regal, and authoritarian. As the thug's friends hurled curses at him, Slight then turned to face the professor. What is the punishment for a student who attacks another with a real weapon? The professor, now trapped, looked away and stammered. The academy promotes active combat training, but I never consented to this duel. Slight shot back. The professor tried to shift the blame, accusing him of brandishing his own sword first, and then lying, claiming he had not seen the earlier insults. Slight's fury detonated, and the golden aura on his blade flared. Before he could make his move, he felt a quick tap upon his cheek. It was Dako Yun. With a single, simple touch, she completely dispersed Slight's powerful aura, returning him to his senses. Stunned, he made his powerful sword disappear, while the professor, seeing he had lost all control, fled, muttering to himself. Dako Yun then scolded Slight, and Yuan understood that the golden sword had a strange effect on his friend's mind. Later on, during their meal, Yuan rebuked Slight for his rash and reckless behavior. Filled with regret, the blonde swordsman apologized, claiming he had control over the sentient sword. Dako Yun cut off their bickering, reminding them all of Professor Yumina's prior warning. If they continued to display such immense power, the scorn from the other students would only intensify. She then faced Yuan directly. You are the class representative. What is your strategy? Yuan considered this for a moment. The true problem was the Academy's flawed system, one that was built on bias and one's place of birth. He asked his party, what is required to earn the favor of the people? Power, they both suggested. Yuan smiled. Something more than that. Something we can already control. He made a square shape with his hands to imitate the shape of a camera. His plan was both simple and masterful. Create a new channel on UnionTuber to document their journey, to create a positive and favorable image, and alter the way the other students perceive them. The first broadcast was a training duel between Dako Yun and a hesitant Slight to make him fight with his all. Dako Yun attacked him for real, throwing him down to the ground and taunting him until he finally fought back with his full, unleashed power. While he recorded the amazing battle, Yuan explained to a very worried Rachel that displaying their true, raw power was the best way to deter any future aggressors. The new channel was an immediate, explosive hit. Their combat video went viral, and other videos showing the team in relaxed moments, playing games, sharing tea with Professor Yamina, Rachel, making silly faces while she was trying new foods, captured the hearts of their audience. They became the most beloved celebrities in the Academy. The next step was a live broadcast of their first ascent to the tower. On the appointed day, a huge crowd came to see them off. Yamina praised their plan, and the party made ready. Yuan, still in his normal school attire, stood out from the others, who were all in combat gear. With great resolve, he straightened his tie and declared that this was all he needed. Yamina then teleported them to the tower's main entrance, where they were greeted with even more stares, now of pure respect and of great curiosity. He declared they would remain for 3 days and 2 nights, and with a floating camera drone recording their every move, he guided his party into the greatest trial of their young lives, praying that his ancestors were watching him. Within the tower, the laws of reality were different, as Yamina had detailed to them in a previous meeting. The floors, or chambers, were constantly altering their design, and death here was not a permanent state. Defeat would simply result in being sent back to the entrance, with the student's pendant allowing them to return to that spot. However, she also confessed that there were places where death was, in fact, the final end of the line. On the very first floor, they were met by creatures known as claw slithers, slimy abominations that were easily dispatched by Slight and Dako Yun. Meanwhile, Yuan tried to absorb the concept of fire from a torch. To his own shock, his special power did not work. Distracted, he was nearly struck by an attack. But Eva defended him, transforming into a chain of deadly spikes. It was then that Rachel finally sprang into the fight, revealing a feral side with burning red eyes and sharp talons, ripping the foul beast to pieces with a raw ferocity. Dako Yun sensed a much stronger energy building and warned her party. One used his eyes and saw a monolith creating a summoning ritual. Rachel, shatter that thing now, he commanded her, with a single devastating strike. She destroyed the monolith before the elite monster could materialize, claiming its powerful core as her prize. It was then that Slight observed something new. Rachel's hair, once a pale pink, now had vibrant, colorful streaks. Yuan revealed this was the sign of Rachel's furnace, heart concept, which consumes emotions to create raw power. Anxious, the young girl asked if she had appeared frightened. Dako Yun, with her typical cold demeanor, said if she lost control, she would be the one to stop her, which only made Rachel even more distressed. Yuan stepped in, vowing to help her master her new ability, and the party was warped away to the second floor. This new area was a lush, green pasture. Yuan used this chance to analyze the core Rachel had acquired, learning both the concepts of acid and fusion. He fed Eva with the acid and imbued the fusion into his own weapon. Monsters, in the shape of malevolent ghosts, began to emerge. Dako Yun obliterated one with a single blast of raw energy. With a mocking tone, she proposed that Yuan should clear the entire floor by himself to accelerate his own growth. After a second of deep thought, he agreed to this difficult challenge. Stretching his arms out, he called forth Eva, who, after she passed through a mystical circle, was transformed into a massive, powerful firearm. With a single word, the weapon unleashed a continuous volley, obliterating the spirits in a matter of seconds. Slight could only watch, amazed, wishing that his own kingdom possessed such a weapon. Dako Yun, although she was quite impressed, identified a weakness. The weapon was useless in close-range combat. As if to prove her point, a spirit silently crept up behind Yuan. Opening a massive mouth, it prepared to devour him whole. His party members screamed out a warning. The protagonist, seeing their panicked faces, quickly turned around and found himself staring into the abyss of the creature's jaws, ignoring his party's desperate cries. Our main hero summoned a sword from out of thin air and faced the evil spirit with one single vertical slice. He dispatched the beast that had tried to ambush him. His two companions, who were frozen in a state of terror, could at last let out a collective sigh of relief. Slight, on the other hand, was left with his jaw hanging open in shock when he saw the protagonist was now wielding a sword. After all, he had also empowered his own blade with many new attributes, in preparation for when the battles became more dire. As for the pink-haired girl, she had no clue the protagonist could even fight with a sword. He very modestly claimed that it was not quite like that. He said he was still a long way from being as skilled as Slight or Dako. Hearing these words, the young woman gave a smile, finding his humility to be quite fitting, and feeling a sense of pride at how much he had grown. But our protagonist did not rest on his laurels. He continued to press his attack, switching between his firearm and his powerful sword strikes, and obliterating all the evil spirits that crossed his path. The monstrous horde just kept on spawning, only to be cut down, one after another. Now, in addition to calling upon Eva, he also fought with the blade with a newfound mastery. Every single move was a display of all he had learned. Smiling, the protagonist said that even if he was not the best, he was striving to evolve with every single battle. After he had eliminated most of the hostile spirits, he rested his blade on the ground and let out a sigh. Tired, he turned his gaze to the others and declared there were no more foes in the vicinity. Only the final one was left standing. With that said, he summoned Eva and changed her into a chain, commanding her to ensnare the final remaining spirit. With the monster restrained, he said they could now rest before they finished their task. While they all recovered their strength, the silver-haired young woman knelt down and touched the remains of one of the defeated monsters. It was then that she saw something quite curious. The edge of our protagonist's blade had actually melted and dissolved the bodies of the monsters. She quickly deduced that he was already using the powers he had just acquired in the previous chamber. Slight, too, could not conceal his astonishment at this sight. Dako, for her own part, did not hold back in her praise for him, stating that his final attack had been truly magnificent. She then began to think to herself aloud, remarking that his combat style was far better than simply flailing a sword, without any form of real strategy. Slight was annoyed by this remark, and asked why she always treated him like a novice. In the middle of this new argument, the protagonist reached into his inventory, pulling out a chill energy drink. He opened it and began to drink it down, laughing at the two of them as they continued to fight. Seeing this, his three companions all glared at him. They were all quite annoyed, wanted to know what he was drinking, and wanting a taste. He simply gestured at the can and said he had no more, stating that this type of drink could be found outside. No one was buying his flimsy excuse, after all. Unlike him, no one else there could just leave to buy a drink. Annoyed, he placed the can back in his own inventory, muttering he would only drink it when he was truly exhausted. This statement captured the attention of the silver-haired girl, who then decided to take charge. From this point on, and seeing that everyone had recovered, the protagonist moved quickly to dispatch the final monster. In that very same instant, a magic circle appeared at their feet as they were being taken away to the next chamber. The protagonist closed his eyes for a moment. He wanted to take a moment to review his own attributes. A new window materialized inside his mind, displaying more than 10 unique attributes. Seeing this new power, he was thrilled. With this new score, he would already be on par with the average academy student. However, he knew that to be more effective, he needed to concentrate on mastering his swordsman talents. The power gap between himself and the man known as a rector, that chasm in just a week. But since he was learning martial forms from his new comrade, he believed he had discovered a path to victory. He knew merely gaining new powers was not enough. He had to evolve them. As he plotted his ascent, he considered asking his classmate for more of her tutelage, but he quickly abandoned the thought, thinking it would be a dishonor to impede her, while he was lost deep within his mind. trying to forge a new path to greater power. Several violent gusts of wind rushed toward it. The true danger was, he was so absorbed in his plans, he was blind to the threat. For a brief moment, he assumed he was just being moved to the next chamber. It was then that a voice began to scream out his name. It was slight, and he was plummeting downwards. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes snapped open to the horror. The four of them were now in a deadly freefall, the air roaring. Confronted with this, the protagonist was gripped by panic. Glancing down below, he tried to process why he was falling from the high heavens. Rachel appeared to be in a much worse state, struggling against the pull of gravity, and tried to keep her skirt from being lifted by the wind. He looked down again, still unable to grasp their fate. But this time, he saw a sight that made his blood freeze. Far below, the ground was a forest of sharpened spears. All of them were aimed directly upwards. With no time to waste, he summoned Eva, who instantly became a living chain. With a single, perfect move, the chain coiled around Rachel, saving her from being impaled by a razor-thin margin. Overwhelmed with relief that it had worked, he exhaled, but kept his grip on the chain with all his might. But this chamber transition point was itself a death trap. As he struggled to understand this new predicament, he heard another comrade call out his name. Looking upwards, he saw the pink-haired girl somehow stuck upside down to the ceiling. Her meaning was incredibly clear. He needed to move, and he needed to move now. But instead of reacting, he was frozen in place, stunned by the sight of her, suspended high above him. The moment she finished her urgent warning, he heard a great sound as one of the walls split open, unleashing a storm of deadly spears right at him. Terrified, his mind raced with possibilities. He could not allow the girl on his chain to fall. He refused to let that happen. Without a second thought, he gave a powerful tug upon the chain, launching her high up into the air. At that same moment, he had the idea to call forth Lilith while still controlling Eva. The young woman let out a scream of fear from the toss, but she needed to be thrown at that specific trajectory for the deadly spears to miss her by a hair's breadth. The protagonist's quick thinking resulted in the spears simply colliding with one another. When the girl began to fall once again, he was already in position to catch her in his arms. She blushed from their sudden closeness as he asked if she was hurt. Now, the two of them were seated upon his hoverbike. Calmly, he apologized for the violent toss from before, stating that the situation was dire and he had no other option. As he was speaking, even more traps were triggered around them. He simply smiled, and with great skill, he began to evade the flying axes that were aimed at them, destroying all of them before they could come too close. Suddenly, it was revealed that Slight was not the same. He now had two sets of draconic wings upon his back. With his holy blade now drawn, he stood among the wreckage of the axes, wondering what in the world was happening. He recalled his meeting with the professor. She had told them that traps would only start at room 20, but they were still only in the third chamber, and the difficulty was already at this insane level. Beating his wings to remain airborne, Slight saw a flying motorcycle race through the chamber and wondered when his new friend had found such an artifact. The protagonist, riding the bike, was clearly annoyed. He pushed its speed, evading the traps that appeared from all sides. Rachel still recalled how he had held her just moments before. Now, with a smile, she held onto his back, feeling much more at ease with the chaotic situation. Startled by this sudden embrace, the protagonist lost his focus for just a moment, and that was long enough for an arrow to strike the motorcycle. He began to weave his way between the pillars of the room, trying to evade the projectiles that were launched at them. The danger was drawing closer and closer to them, until a blade of light deflected a volley of spears. The protagonist brought the motorcycle to a halt, and glancing over, he saw Slight hovering in the air. He demanded to know why his friend was just observing the fight. Looking more closely at Slight's new form, the protagonist was stunned, and he asked, "Were those new wings?" The blond boy also had a question. Gesturing toward the motorcycle, he demanded to know where it had been acquired, saying it looked to be an artifact from Yu-Wan's homeworld. The protagonist then inquired about Dako, concerned that she may have fallen into one of the traps. But her own situation was quite the opposite. She was moving with blinding speed along the tower walls. The protagonist did not know where she was, but he knew she would not fall for such a simple trap. And he was correct. The young woman evaded the spears like a master, always with fluid and perfectly timed movements, while keeping a watchful eye on everything. Now, with no concern for her own well-being, Slight asked his friend what they should do. He recalled the user manual, which had stated they must. The protagonist ordered Slight to fly to the far side of the chamber, so he would have a chance to analyze the patterns of the traps. As Slight flew, the protagonist watched him and saw something. All of the traps were targeting only a single person, Slight. That is when it dawned on him. Perhaps the traps were only targeting whoever was in motion. He recalled the situation with his comrade at the very start, and at last he understood. They had to avoid making any thoughtless moves in this chamber. The protagonist placed his hands upon his head, annoyed that he had not figured it out much sooner. Meanwhile, his close comrade was trying to warn him about another arrow now aimed at him. The new arrow struck the floating motorcycle. Frustrated, the protagonist pulled the arrow out and held it tight. He had to tell the others to stop all of their movements. But if they did, how could they ever clear this level? Gripping the projectile tighter, he at last perceived something. A strange reaction was now occurring to. Looking at it closely, he saw that the arrow was being absorbed. This phenomenon was new. Since the very first chamber, he had tried and failed to absorb concepts, but it had never worked before. Now, he looked at his own sword. Could his new theory be correct? He would not know until he tried. And so, he made the choice to take hold of the sword. His new companion, not grasping his plan, simply observed him. Before her very eyes, he began to absorb the sword itself, and they both were left in a state of shock. After the blade had dissolved right inside the protagonist's hand, becoming nothing but a fine golden powder, he had received the concept, but not the one he had expected. Instead of the concept of sword, he gained the concept of cut, which brought to mind the powerful thrusting technique that his new comrade had been teaching to him. While he was contemplating this revelation, Rachel asked him to look in a specific direction. When he did, he saw Slight surfing upon a wave of traps. After he had escaped from the wave, annoyed, he leaned his weight upon his sword. All of this had happened because he had lowered his guard, believing that only the flying weapons were a threat. After he had fallen for the clever trap, Slight's own vision began to go dark, and he knew that he could no longer defend himself from the dozens of new traps that were now spawned. At this moment, the protagonist did not remain idle. He was now on Lilith, his personal glider motorcycle, and had to leave Rachel by herself to go and aid Slight. Before he left her, he had already apologized to her, and the young girl knew that he did not want her involved. As the protagonist soared his way over the waves, striking his friend, he gained even more points in his water concept. Everything occurred just as he had predicted. What had touched him was the water, but he had been given the concept of waves. At last, he began to truly grasp his own power, and the reason that he had not gained the sword concept before. As he flew onward upon the motorcycle, Dako was leaping from one pillar to the next. Analyzing the dire situation, she was surprised to look down and see the protagonist upon the flying motorcycle, with great waves of energy coming from its sides. He was heading his way towards Slight, because he now knew that the state of the substance, at the moment that it was created, was what decided the concept he would gain. Just like the strange trap that had aimed for his neck had given him the dark concept of beheading. With this knowledge, he flew toward the activated spears and arrows, all of which were now falling down upon Slight. He screamed out to Slight, telling him he would handle the situation, and pushed the motorcycle to its top speed. It was in this moment that he prayed his all-seeing eye ability would evolve. The arrows were now drawing ever closer to Slight, who was screaming out for his assistance. The protagonist then closed his own eyes. He stretched out his hands toward the weapons and engaged his power. When he once more opened his eyes, a single written word had appeared on the tip of each blade, a concept that he could now comprehend. The true intention of each weapon was laid bare, and now all of them were aimed directly at him. The small blonde boy was in a state of shock at what had happened. He had been saved from certain death. However, now the protagonist was the target of all those deadly weapons. He grabbed a hold of one, but did not want to take them one by one, afraid that the concepts would all mix and lose their true forms. So he unleashed a massive wave of his own energy, linking the concept that he held in his hand to all of the other concepts from the other weapons. When he had at last completed the ritual, an intense golden light appeared and enveloped him. His plan to infuse all of the concepts had been a success. On the other side of a large chamber, the pink-haired girl had witnessed everything. The last remnants of the golden light made the scene beautiful. Calmly, she held out her own hands, allowing the golden dust from the destroyed weapons to fall on them. With a very faint smile, it was clear that she was pleased with Yuan's great progress. He at last brought the motorcycle to a stop near Slight, who then ran his way toward him. The protagonist was happy to see his friend was uninjured. Slight looked with surprise at what he was now carrying and asked what it was. The protagonist said he did not know. He just stated that it appeared when he fused all the weapons. While the two of them were in conversation, another new trap was triggered. They both went on high alert, but to their great relief, the two girls had appeared. With amazing and perfectly synced movements, they deflected the swords away with their own strikes, preventing any further harm from occurring. Rachel let out a sigh of relief, while the silver-haired girl used the chance to berate the two of them once again. The protagonist was so impressed with the girl's abilities that he did not even mind her condescending tone. Slight, on the other hand, did not appreciate it at all. With the last trap disabled, the 4 orbs of light appeared, and the room began to change. While they were all being teleported away, the protagonist simply watched the duo arguing again. Slight was asking why she always had to act like the savior, arriving at the very last second just to be dramatic. The protagonist actually found this to be inspiring, even though they were constantly at odds. He knew that one of them would always save the other. In response, Dako simply said that she had waited on purpose until the final moment in order to surprise them all. They were all transported into the 4th chamber. Now, at the very least, the protagonist could get a clear look at the monsters before being attacked. They were all giant spiders, staring at the creature that stood before him. He did not know what it was or what power it held. Slight revealed that this was a very unique monster, the tower spider, and that it could spawn at any time. With that, he unsheathed his powerful sword, ready to take the lead in the fight and protect his friend. Since, even after Yuan's most powerful attacks, the spiders had not taken so much as a single scratch. Dako, on the other hand, stepped in front of the entire group and ordered them all to take a single step back. Looking directly at the protagonist, she told him to observe her next actions with care. She began to gather energy within her own hands, forming a powerful, cannon-like attack. With one immense shot, she struck a great number of spiders. The blast of raw energy left the protagonist speechless. Her powerful attack was far stronger than Eva's projectiles. It was then that the young woman told everyone to leave the final attack of the fight to the protagonist. Looking at him, she gave a smirk and boasted, saying that she was a truly phenomenal teacher. A bit flustered, he gave a small smile back, drew his own sword, and asked Slight to cover his back. He then stepped forward to face the spider horde, grateful for the opportunity to finish them himself. However, Slight and Rachel, who were observing, were very worried, and with very good reason. When the protagonist struck the spider's hard shell, the powerful blow had no effect and just made his hands itch. He struck it again with even more force, but the shell was simply too thick. After this failed attack, it was now the spider's turn. Its many eyes glowed, and it lunged right toward it. Sensing the imminent danger, he leaped backward, barely escaping its attack. But he did not relent and advanced. Once more, this time, remembering to use a powerful thrust. At the very least, he now hit the spider's head, but it was still not a strong enough blow to defeat. The pair was excited to see that he was making some progress. Even so, the protagonist knew that he could not win with such weak attacks. He felt frustrated, just thinking that the tower spiders were too powerful for him. Suddenly, he recalled something he should have realized sooner. The many new concepts he had absorbed in the previous room. He still had not used a single one. Seeing this was the perfect chance, he infused the new cutting concept directly into his sword. As soon as the weapon had accepted the new concept, it began to spark with small lightning bolts, and with a single swing, it radiated a truly powerful new aura. He decided to test if this new power would work on the spiders. The sword moved with great speed, cutting the spider with ease. The sensation of at last landing a blow was amazing. Slight was completely stunned by his friend's instant evolution. Even Dako herself was taken by surprise, but she made no comment in order to avoid attention. After his successful attack, the protagonist felt he had made a clean cut, but something still felt a bit strange. He began to wonder if he had not swung the sword with much more force than was needed, and he tried it once again. Seeing his determination, Slight and the pink-haired girl moved in to assist him. Dako, after she had observed him for a little while, knew that he had done something new to the sword that had allowed him to cut the spiders with such ease. She continued to watch as he kept on cutting the spiders, trying to refine his new skills with every single blow. She knew that when a person strengthens their own weapon, they often just swing it around with no real technique. But the protagonist did not show any signs of this flaw. She hoped that, even if it were to take some time, one day, he would grasp the true essence of a cut for himself. As she watched him, she recalled her own personal story. After she had conquered the 3 great calamities. She was hailed as the greatest prodigy of the martial world. And now, she knew that she was watching someone as good as her. Someone who made her own great talents seem quite small. Unaware of all this, the protagonist just kept on swinging his sword, focused on obliterating the tower spiders. While in combat, even without knowing what his friend was now thinking, the protagonist felt a sudden, strange chill. Slight, seeing him look around the chamber, asked what was happening. At one point, his gaze met with Dako's, who, upon seeing him with drinks in his own hand, ran after him. At that same moment, the four of them got an external communication. It was the very same message for all of them. A dire warning from the director to flee the tower at once. The protagonist did not know the reason for this haste. Meanwhile, Rachel could tell that something was troubling Dako. This peace did not last for very long. Rachel screamed, warning them that the enemy was approaching. They all looked and were gripped by terror. Two massive portals had opened up, and hundreds of spiders began to pour out from them. Now, they knew why they had been told to retreat. It did not end there. Even more dimensional rifts appeared. When they attempted to use their student ID cards, they saw that they had absolutely no signal. With their notifications completely disabled, the group was now well and truly trapped. Slight immediately drew his own sword, readying himself for the worst to come. They all knew that this was the dangerous scenario the teacher had warned them all about before, one that had the power to end their lives. The portals had now covered the room with spiders on the floor, on the walls, and on the very ceiling, advancing on them without giving them a moment to breathe. Rachel and Slight were the very first to charge into the fight. Faced with such a great number of spiders, the protagonist was filled with dread. He had never faced such impossible odds. He recalled the meeting where the teacher, Yamina, had told them there was a great risk of dimensional pirates invading the tower. She said that due to these strange invasions, the safe areas could become hostile, the number of monsters would increase, and the difficulty would rise unpredictably. And now, they were living through that exact same scenario. A great explosion created a new path in the wall. The protagonist on his bike with Rachel on the back followed the others to a much larger open space. Seeing the spiders now coming through the new entrance, Slight was enraged. Rachel growled with pure anger, and the glow in the spiders' eyes grew much more intense. Now, very well organized, they invaded the room where the group was. There seems to be no end to them, the silver-haired young woman said before she attacked again. Using her own energy explosion, she aimed a large group of spiders and then fired, wiping out several of them at once. Seeing her own resolve, Slight also entered the battle, and the two of them together began to do a lot of damage. Dako and Slight were already beginning to get worn down. Rachel, too, after she had used up so much of her power, already had most of her own hair darkened. She was barely speaking and only growling, driven by her will to kill all of the spiders. The protagonist knew that if her hair were to become fully dark, things would become much worse. Dako, seeing his great concern, ceased her attack and approached him. She spoke of Rachel's very dire situation and confessed that even she herself could not last for much longer without any rest. Hearing that she was starting to tire, the protagonist did not even hesitate. He took an energy drink can from his inventory and gave it to her, saying that he would hold back the spiders while she drank. She accepted the drink and smiled, and asked if he truly thought he could handle it alone. "You bet," he confidently replied, taking out a powerful grenade out of thin air, showing that he had been prepared. He pulled the pin and prepared to throw the device. "Now watch this," he said. He then threw the grenade, which flew over the spiders. A strange power then enveloped the grenade, which then exploded high up in the air, creating a great wave of fire that consumed the monsters. The explosion was so immense that the hot shockwave forced Slight to have to fall back and protect himself with his own sword. While he was defending himself, he saw the protagonist fly right past him on the motorcycle and asked what that strange new power was. "I put a great deal of effort into this new weapon," he replied, asking that Slight take a moment to rest. He knew that Dako still had a great deal of her energy, but he could not rely on her strength all by herself. He continued to press his attack, not knowing how long the spiders would continue to spawn, trying to buy as much time as he possibly could for his friends. Suddenly, he had received a new notification. The blood poison on his sword had now increased up to 15, and the cutting concept had just leveled up to 2. Surprised by the rapid speed, he looked at the sword in his hand and saw it was turning red. Although he did not know how the blood poison worked, he kept on fighting, thinking he would find out soon. When he used the sword against the new spiders, a great amount of energy was now released. Along with the cut, something quite strange happened. The trajectory of the cut had seemed to have changed, becoming much longer. He saw that the cutting concept increased the sword's power, and the blood poison increased the attack's overall range. The only problem was that, for this to all happen, the sword itself needed to drink his own blood. The protagonist was a bit afraid of this new weapon, knowing that he could not use it too many times. Slight then approached him, confessing he was impressed that he was showing something new. Again, seeing Slight and Dako arrive, the protagonist then asked them where Rachel was. The two of them said she must be around killing spiders. He wanted to insist that the two of them take a rest, but they claimed they had already recovered. As they got ready to switch places with the protagonist, Slight then realized that the number of spiders had decreased. Hearing this, they all looked at the passage and saw that the flow of monsters was now slowing down. This could only mean one of two different things. Either the fight was ending or something far worse was coming, and Rachel sensed exactly that. A strange, dark energy made her growl. She stopped right in front of a very specific location, just in time to see a new portal, larger than all the ones that had come before it, begin to form. It was then that the elite tower spider monster entered the room. The protagonist was stunned to see the massive spider, several times larger than any other that was there. While he stared, Slight yelled for his attention. Should there be more than just one elite monster? He asked. This caught the protagonist's attention, who then turned and understood the cause of his friend's despair. There was not just a single giant monster, but two. They were now completely surrounded. Slight was now extremely on edge, asking what in the world was happening. While he was beginning to freak out, unlike all the others, Rachel was getting more and more angry. Baring her fangs, she charged toward one of the giant spiders, attacking it without any second thoughts. Slight was getting quite worried, but the protagonist said that this might be a good thing, and that they should all coordinate to assist her. They then agreed that they would split up. Slight and Rachel would take on one of the spiders, while the protagonist and Dako would deal with the other one. Now in position in front of his new spider, the protagonist then raised up his sword. All of his newfound confidence seemed to be gone when faced with a great monster of this massive size. Seeing his hesitation, Dako, who had already finished her drink, came to him and whispered, "You said you could handle this with my own assistance, did you not?" She then moved away from him, tossed the now empty can right back at him, and materialized her own personal sword and stood in front of him to lead their new attack. "Now, we will pay the price for that sweetness of yours," she said as she faced the giant spider. Startled, the protagonist wondered why she had drawn her own sword. She was clearly demonstrating her technique for him. Noticing his very curious eyes, she looked at him with a sharp gaze and said, annoyed, "I just do not wish to get my own hands dirty. Do not get the wrong idea." But that was not entirely true. After she had analyzed what he had learned for so long, she knew that he was still missing one move to master, and she was determined that she would show it to him. Just this one time, strong, blue energy surrounded her. As she made ready for her own attack, she wanted the protagonist to pay very close attention. Her eyes now shone with the same blue hue as her energy. But in the brief moment she extended her arm for the attack, the protagonist had lost all of his concentration. The reason for this was quite simple. On the other side, Rachel had lost all control, and instead of attacking the spider, she started to attack Slight. He tried to defend himself with his own sword, but the young girl was completely enraged. Neither of them had noticed that their elite spider was advanced. The spider then jumped and shot a jet of web to trap the two of them. Slight was caught completely by surprise. Thinking fast, he threw Rachel away so she would not be caught. With that, he was left all alone to be wrapped inside the web. The young woman landed on a pillar, growling at the giant spider, which then growled right back. With all of this new chaos, it was impossible for the protagonist to focus 100%. Noticing his distraction, Dako then scolded him. "Where are you looking? You must only look at me." He insisted that he had been watching, but confessed that he was quite worried. The moment that he said that, she moved her sword with her energy. She then performed the movement slowly so that he could observe. "It is all right," she said to him. And then the giant spider in front of her simply collapsed, perfectly sliced right down the middle. The powerful blow Dako used was a simple strike from bottom to top. See the immeasurable chasm that separated his power from hers. The spider collapsed as its body parts flew in all directions. After witnessing this, The protagonist was flooded with a barrage of new notifications. So many new concepts, his head began to ache from the overload. He had just comprehended god-tier sword techniques, and many of his other concepts had also gained a new level. The power he witnessed was akin to Ortima's oppressive force field. Shaking from the mental strain, he wondered how one could imbue so much will into a blade. The concept itself was so lethal and alive it sent a shiver down his spine. With his vision still blurred, the girl suddenly came closer and demanded if he had observed her killing blow with care. He complained that her face was too close, and she simply tossed a shimmering purple orb to him. With the orb now resting in his hand, he could feel that it was overflowing with raw power. He felt a wave of joy, but wondered if he should accept it, as she was the one who won it. With a faint smile, the girl informed him it was his prize, and he should not refuse. He should simply take the gift she had offered. From a short distance away, Slight witnessed the two of them being friendly and grew enraged, screaming at them to cease their chatter and come to his aid. He had been ensnared in those webs and was now quite concerned because Rachel, who was still in her berserker state, had already slain her own spider and was now running rampant. The protagonist gazed at the now feral young woman, afraid. Seeing Slight's pathetic state, Dako only remarked, "He is a complete and utter fool. Our hero knew if they advanced, they would be cut down in a flash by the out-of-control girl." He turned his gaze back and declared that the only one who could handle this situation was Dako. She did not seem pleased by this at all, about having to solve all of the party's issues yet again. Meanwhile, the completely feral young woman began to turn toward the others. The protagonist attempted to plead his case with Dako, begging for her help, as this was a truly dire situation. Being quite persistent and with a sound argument, she was not able to refuse him, but she did notice something. With that, she decided to act and began her warm-up. Seeing this new resolve, the protagonist felt a thrill. Looking right at him, she declared she would keep the beast busy, but in exchange, he would have to slay the other spider. In the middle of their new agreement, Dako cut off her own words and charged right toward Rachel, still taunting her with insults to lure her in closer. She said she could have some real fun with that feral girl, and the more that she provoked her, the deeper Rachel descended into a state of blind rage. At least Dako achieved her goal. Rachel lunged at her with her sharpened claws, leaping from the corpse of the dead spider. Dako simply evaded the first furious attack and jumped away, continuing with her string of insults. With every one of Rachel's wild blows, she performed a simple move to parry the strike. After a great number of attacks, the girl had not landed a single scratch on Dako. Now, in the position she had wanted, Dako grabbed hold of Rachel's wrist and threw her down. With a heavy impact, a glimmer of reason returned to the girl, but it was still not enough to save her. Seeing this, Dako let her go and uttered a few more taunts, telling her to cease her blind assault on someone stronger, and then ordering her to get back up. She declared she would entertain her just enough to stay aware. While he was hearing the young woman growling, the protagonist was watching the two of them fight. Seeing that he was still distracted, Dako berated him once more, and with that, he materialized his own sword to face the spider. Even when facing that massive beast, Dako was certain that he would be able to win if he had observed her killing blow correctly. He asked her what she was basing all of this confidence on. At that moment, one of the spider's giant claws struck the ground, very close to where the protagonist was standing. He was barely able to evade the attack. Slight, from far away, saw his friend was almost struck. Although the giant spider was now very weak, it had still misjudged his own raw power. Seeing that he was being mocked, even by a spider, he was so annoyed that he ground his own teeth. Knowing what to do, he then called forth Eva. This time, not just a single chain had appeared, but many, along with various mystical runes. The chains ensnared a large portion of the spider, which then expressed its great dissatisfaction. Slight was shocked to see that his friend had managed to bind the beast. Dako also glanced back for just a single moment, diverting her gaze away from her own difficult fight. The protagonist advanced with his blade against the bound spider, but not all of the creature's legs were trapped. The ones that were free tried to strike him down, but he evaded them all multiple times, with Eva's help holding most of the limbs. And with the cutting and blood poison concepts on his sword, he was ready. He got as close as he could, and with rage in his eyes, he struck the massive spider. The blow found its mark, but was not strong enough to defeat. Watching all this, Slight was quite skeptical, wondering why the powerful attack had not worked. Without much effort needed to parry, Rachel, Dako watched the protagonist with her discerning eyes. He fell back a few feet, wondering why his attack was so weak. Looking down at his own sword, he finally saw that the blood poison had not been activated. At that very same moment, the spider, which had already been ensnared, began to shatter the chains to break itself free. It was logical that one of his abilities had failed. After the great spider had freed itself, it was ready to resume its assault at once. It delivered a powerful blow with its huge legs, an attack that could have ended his journey right then and there. As the giant spider broke its chains and attacked our protagonist, raising a great cloud of dust, Dako was frozen, leaving herself wide open for a new attack. However, when the great dust cloud had settled, everyone could see the spider falling down to the ground, while the young man was still holding onto his sword. Immediately after this, the sword then fell, and he, too, collapsed, completely drained of his strength. Gripped by a sudden wave of mental fatigue, he recalled what had just taken place. As soon as the sword and the spider's leg had connected, he changed the trajectory of his attack at the last second. He was shaking as he retrieved his own sword, knowing that if he had taken that blow head-on, both he and his precious weapon would have been destroyed. He wondered how he had managed to see that new movement for just one instant. It was as if a fraction of a second had become an eternity. It was then that a new notification had appeared. By evading that attack, he had mastered the new concept of flow. Understanding what had occurred made the protagonist struggle to get back up to his feet, praising his great friend inside his own thoughts. As he approached the great spider once more, he now understood that he would never be able to perfectly copy her swordsmanship, but he now knew what he had to do to get stronger. With his blade in hand, he then faced the spider, challenging it to a fight. Sensing this hostility, it raised up its legs to attack him one more time. But this time, he was able to swing the sword, continuously defending and deflecting all its attacks. While he was watching, Slight recalled a swordsmanship concept that was called parry, which involved deflecting or redirecting an enemy's attacks. If it was applied correctly, it could create a new opening in the opponent's own defense. Slight knew that this was only a tactical concept, and the reality of it was very different. But his new friend seemed to be doing the impossible, even without having any prior real experience. He was already showing an incredible new ability. Watching how he was evading all the attacks, Slight wondered if he had truly never held a sword before. After he deflected yet another new attack, the protagonist at last found the opening he was looking for, using the deflection concept for all of the frontal attacks, and spinning his own sword to defend against a new side attack. He was able to continue to press his advance. Slowly but surely, he began to see his own path to victory. But there was another fight that was still dragging on. The girls. Rachel was still in her berserker state. But at one point, she was disarmed by tripping over Dako's feet, who then calmly knocked her back down, while she continued to watch the protagonist's own fight, thinking that it was all truly unbelievable. She had thought he would learn something from her own technique, but it was he who was now showing her something completely new. She recalled that there was a martial art that had used flow as its own essence, but few people dared to use it, as it was an ability that required seizing a very brief moment, something that was almost impossible. But she was now watching the protagonist do it repeatedly. Now it was the great spider that was being pressured. The silver-haired young woman knew that using this technique was very risky and required a truly enormous amount of effort. That is why most people like Slight look for easier techniques. But she had always wanted to truly master the martial arts, and now she felt as if he was giving her that one opportunity. While Dako was lost deep in her thoughts, Rachel had gotten back up again in the meantime. Now, with a little bit of her reason, she took a few hits while Slight asked to be set free. Dako did not want to deal with either of them. She just wanted to get back to watching the great fight. She knew that just reflecting all of the attacks would not be enough for him to claim his victory. At one point, gritting his teeth, the protagonist advanced toward the giant spider, even while being threatened by one of its legs. He continued with his own movement. Dako watched as he used the great strength of the enemy, spinning around quickly and combining two new abilities. And right before her very eyes, with the sword spinning in a horizontal arc from bottom to top, he was able to cut into the massive spider. The final blow was perfect, and it hit the target. The spider then began to howl out in great pain. Watching this new scene, Slight was completely speechless, while the silver-haired young woman, slightly blushing, was now thrilled with raw emotion. Seeing the protagonist's success would overcome this great trial. And now, just watching the giant spider fall, with the final defeat of the great spider, its massive body collapsed down to the ground. Soon after, it was Ban Yuan's turn, who also fell down, defeated by the great stress and fatigue of the hard battle. As the protagonist let out a great sigh, a new set of system notifications began to arrive, informing him that his external and internal concepts have been temporarily fused into one. He could feel the massive changes now occurring in his core. At that very same moment, he heard a call from Slight, who was still trapped in the webs. The situation was now becoming much more complicated. When Dako also pleaded for his help with the uncontrollable beast, the protagonist felt completely overwhelmed. He had just barely managed to defeat an elite, and everyone was already relying on him to fix everything. Amidst all of this chaos, Slide said that the webs could only be undone with magic, while Dako warned him of Rutschel's seemingly limitless stamina. Seeing the two of them now arguing over who to help first, the protagonist had a new idea. His solution was to absorb the concept of the very web that held Slide. With this new plan, he then acquired the new web concept and immediately used it as fuel for the little Eva. Using this brand new power, he created net-shaped chains and launched them toward Rutschel, immobilizing the now uncontrollable girl on the ground. The protagonist then warned her that escape was impossible, as the chains would simply drain all of her magic. As she struggled to break free, the chains held her down tighter, until the scene made both he and Dako blush a deep red. Embarrassed, Slight quickly covered the protagonist's own eyes, who was now annoyed that he was the only one who could not see. Although this dire situation had at last been resolved, the room's transition still did not happen. The chains, on the other hand, had worked, and Rutschel's hair began to return to its pink color. The protagonist then saw that his student ID was now active again, and asked the others if it was now time to leave. They all quickly agreed, but were then startled by a red shadow that appeared near them. The new shadow, like an illusion, began to whisper that they had all passed the final test. Not knowing how they should react, the group watched the shadow condense into a circle of intense internal energy. This strange circle then became a red light and finally transformed itself into a woman, who offered to them a new and rare opportunity to forge a brand new contract with the 10,000-eyed observer. Meanwhile, just outside of the Great Tower, the teacher was now waiting with great anxiety. Her face showed all of her concern as she held the ID. Suddenly, a large portal had formed in front of the tower, and when the dust had all settled, she saw her students with the protagonist at the front. Yamina ran to them, asking them again if they were all right. The protagonist then reassured her, stating that everyone was safe and sound. The teacher then confessed her great concern, explaining that they had not left even after her evacuation notice. Faced with this new question, the protagonist asked to go somewhere private before explaining. Speaking for the entire group, he said that they were all caught in an irregularity after the transition had taken them to room 4. But he confessed that it was hard to put into words everything that had actually happened. Yamina then revealed to them what she had known. She said the irregularity was caused by an external intruder who had killed another one of the students. She explained that these intruders are dimensional pirates who prey on the new students in order to steal their IDs, which then prevents their resurrection and traps them in the tower. Regarding the terrible invaders' own fate, she revealed that they had managed to escape the silver-haired girl. Dako Yun then interjected, questioning if these events did not feel like some kind of test. She argued that if intruders could invade the Academy's essence, the tower, and nothing at all could be done, then the school could not claim to be the best in the multiverse. The teacher, Yamina, did not agree, explaining to them the very harsh reality. The Academy protects all of its students, but inside of the tower, they are on their own. If the tower were to choose the invaders over the students, the Academy could not intervene in the matter. That was the will of the tower, and it had to be respected. Exalted, Dako repeated the teacher's own words with great scorn. Gripping her ID, she stated she did not like this situation and would much rather teleport than continue this conversation. And so she did, vanishing before a very helpless Yamina. Seeing what had just happened, the protagonist then stepped in. He asked the teacher to understand Dako's harsh reaction, as something quite terrible had happened in there. Intrigued, Yamina requested that he tell her what it was. He took a moment to think, looking for the best way to explain that before they had returned. They had had a strange encounter. An encounter that made Slight and Rutschel very uncomfortable, and that even he himself did not know how to express in words. Hanyun, One revealed to the teacher that they had met a constellation. It was well known that the constellations were made of godlike patrons or observers who watched over many different dimensions. When they would find someone who had interested them, they would then form a contract with those chosen people. They were all transcendental beings who held great influence in this new dimension. They could grant access to powerful new magic, as well as unique abilities and all-powerful new artifacts. However, they demanded a great price in return. But up until now, no one had refused them. Everyone knew that in a world where power is a currency, there was nothing sweeter than their tempting new offers. The constellations were known to be very attractive partners, which is the very reason the teacher could not believe the observers were in the same world as them. The protagonist said that the thousand-eyed observer had spoken. He also stated that this observer had a very strange new voice and had promised them power in exchange for their obedience. The teacher, not knowing what the real story was, found this all to be very incredible, with a bright look on her face as she spoke. Even with the teacher so very excited, the pink-haired girl, as well as Slight, were not excited at all. After the protagonist had asked the teacher if this was incredible, and she confirmed, he then asked a difficult and sudden question. But he wanted to know what the Academy's official stance was on this. At first, the teacher was surprised by her student's new question, but she stated that the Academy valued a neutral stance. When she said that they encouraged these very contracts, the protagonist then understood this new point. Hearing all of this information internally, the protagonist could not believe that a place like the Academy had no real defense at all. Returning to the moment with the teacher's insistent new questions, who want to know what the observer's own request had been. That one question had made Banyu want even more tense, and he revealed that the request had been an elimination. The teacher was quite shocked by what the protagonist had said. She was very confused and wanted him to be much clearer. It was then that he revealed the full, terrible story. The observer had promised a new contract to two of them if they were to agree to eliminate the other two. So that was the reason that the group was so very annoyed. He told them that back inside of the tower, the constellation's strange new voice had spoken to them, making a bizarre new proposal and swearing its loyal love. The being had reached out its hand to the four of them, waiting for one of them to make the first move and fulfill its request. Our main character then recalled, grinding his teeth at all of that nonsensical talk. He was not going to join them, and hoped Dako would not either. Looking over to his side, our protagonist saw his friend was gathering up her energy. The young girl's piercing eyes were shaking from the great amount of power she was now exuding. He told Yamina that Dako was asking them to leave her be, but the professor then grew sad. She knew that the young woman had released her own energy to force the mighty constellation to have to leave. After he had finished telling his own story, the professor then asked if that meant they could not enter the tower. Our main character was relying on the tower for his own duel against a rector, and not using it was very inconvenient. He thought that he would just have to train with the little time that he still had left. He then called the professor and stated he was now thinking of sending what happened as a new report, along with the new recording that he had made. She said that would be fine, but if it was possible, she would like to hear more of it while they had a meal. But when he had looked at the young girl, he knew that it would not be possible. Not after everything that had taken place. The protagonist explained that both of them were now exhausted, both physically and also mentally. She was devastated when she knew how her students now felt. In the end, the professor praised the three of them for a job well done. Our main character was very grateful for her consideration. She promised that she would do all that she could so that this would never happen to them again, hoping that none of them would think poorly of the Academy. With that, she told them all to go and get some much-needed rest. Slight said his own goodbyes to the two of them, as he and Rutschel then left by using their teleportation. Meanwhile, our main character asked them to give Dako his regards. He was then about to leave as well, but the professor asked him to wait for just a brief moment. She said that she had a new question to ask him, and warned him that she was now going to be very direct. Then with a worried look, she asked why the observer had not just simply promised new contracts to just two of the four of them, but instead it had selected both him and Dako Young. The professor's question had shocked our protagonist, but in the end, he confirmed her new question. Deep down, he now knew the observer was not just trying to turn them all against each other. He seemed to be trying to sift something out from the sand, and the observer had pointed to them, claiming that they could definitely reach the top together, but only if they were to get rid of the dead weight. When they had seen this, both the blue-eyed blonde boy and the pink-haired girl were crushed. That strange being, who had appeared from nowhere and had seemed like an enemy before, was now trying to make their two new friends have a fight. Our protagonist and the silver-haired young woman were both surprised by the strange new proposal. The entity was promising that as long as they killed the other two, all of the climbers would get much more radiant treasure, and that they should take full advantage of it, because that was just how the cruel world was. After he had told her everything, and recalled things with Professor Yamina, he went back to his own dorm, finding her sitting in a fetal pose. He then looked at his own companion, wondering if Slight had not even bothered to take a shower. Our protagonist then approached Slight, attempting to break the ice, saying that the way he was now sitting was quite impressive. Pina, he then turned to go to the washroom, while his new companion was trying to say something. Slight asked him if he was trying to humiliate him. Rolling his eyes, the protagonist was scared by this new question, not knowing why his own companion would think that. His companion apologized, saying he just wanted to vent. He said the protagonist could insult him if he wanted, since he was now nothing. All of this had made the protagonist feel bad for being close to Slight. A few minutes later, for the first time since he'd entered that room, Slight lifted up his head to look right into the protagonist's eyes. He told him he hated him, which had left the protagonist not knowing how he should react. Even though our protagonist also wanted to express his own hatred, he had to just settle for only thinking about it. So he would have to endure all of this and just wait, saying that he was naive, which could prove to be useful. Despite all of this, our protagonist decided he would sit and listen to what his own roommate had to say. It was then that he had told Slight he could say whatever he wanted. He would not mind. However, Slight continued to just sit there, quite depressed, but he then decided to speak. He said he was important in his own world. He was one of the most talented, and for what the protagonist had known of Slight, he already knew that he would be talented in his own world. Slight's own father had said he was exaggerating, as had his own family and even his new companions. They praised him and spoke of his great new talent, even giving him the legendary sacred sword and trusting him with a truly unparalleled new power. He said that it was thanks to everyone who had trusted him. He was able to forge a new contract with the sacred sword. Bora asked why they were so very worried about the protagonist, who still tried to tell Slight that he was talented. He did not need to take the words of that strange entity into consideration. While he was listening to what the protagonist was now saying, Slight's own eyes widened, since for him, the situation was different. So, Slight used the protagonist's own words against him, claiming it was easy to ignore the entity since he was chosen. Slight, now deeply offended, continued with his list of complaints. To start with, they were divine beings. They were all transcendental beings, much stronger and more well-known than any of the humans. He could not believe the protagonist, Dako, could refuse their offer so very easily. Upon hearing that, the protagonist was very surprised by this new question. He understood more or less what Slight was now trying to imply, and he then lowered down his own head, stating he rejected it because that sort of proposal was pointless. He also explained that there were many other ways to stand out. Slight, however, claimed he was only saying this because he had amazing talent, and he, to be completely honest, said that if he were able to receive a choice from a divine being, he would even hesitate, but with some great reluctance. Our protagonist could not believe he was now hearing Slight say that. He would not reject the offer so very easily. He said that he might have even made that very same choice. But the real fact was that he felt resentful and quite afraid, faced with that truly scary new revelation. Our protagonist could not say anything more. After his shower, he sighed many times while drying his hair. He then looked around and saw that now, much calmer, Slight had gone off to bed, feeling that he was now calmer. Our protagonist looked over at him. For a brief moment, he even thought he was asleep and chose to leave. But at that very moment, the young man had called him Slight, now with a very guilty new expression on his own face. He apologized to our protagonist for crying like that. He also said that what had happened was not just his own fault, and so he then apologized for acting in that manner. Since his friend was now calmer and was apologizing, our protagonist then gave a very faint smile. He told him it was okay, because they were friends after all. Hearing these very kind words, Slight had to try not to cry. Our protagonist said he could listen to him anytime, and then warned him that he would have to leave for a while. After that, he opened his own inventory and took out a mug of hot cocoa, planning to leave it there for Slight. As he put the cup down, he said that things they do not like would all go away after they ate something sweet. After he had departed from the room, the protagonist thought. Lost in thought, the silver-haired warrior appeared. He was completely oblivious to her arrival. She then drew very close to him. Her eyes gleamed as she said, "So you have returned." She also confessed her relief at not having to search inside. When a young woman suddenly approached him, he was startled, demanding why she was in the men's dormitory. She silenced him, claiming it's not a crime if there are no witnesses. Before he could even protest, the young woman seized him by his collar. Now seated on a bench somewhere on the academy grounds, our protagonist asked if she had sought him out, simply because the nearby cafe was too full. She claimed to have only arrived after wandering for a short while, without a destination. However, she admitted curiosity about how the worthless slight was holding up. Our hero immediately reprimanded her for speaking that way. She questioned if she was not merely stating a fact, and the problem, as she saw it, was that all of his power came from his sword. She asked if Yuan didn't sense that as well. She claimed that all his power, or the instincts he sharpened through combat, even Slight's own unique abilities, every single thing came from that cursed sword. Without shame, she then added even more flaws to her long list of grievances against the swordsman. She also declared that he could not grasp the situation. Our protagonist, now feeling quite frustrated, demanded that she stop, but she ended by saying in hard times, Slight loses all of his courage and his will to fight. She was not satisfied with just demeaning Slight. She also began to list all of Rutschel's weaknesses. With that, our protagonist let out a sigh. He did not know if she just wanted to mock her friend, or to show that she was actually worried. In the end, he just looked up and asked if she was all right. This unexpected question caught her completely off guard, so he had to elaborate on his point, saying that she had been acting strangely since her encounter with the divine entity. She even showed her anger toward the professor, and he asked her again if she was all right. The young woman was clearly startled, blushing deeply in a rare moment of shyness. She asked if he had figured that out with his powers. He just simply tilted his head backward, returning to his original calm demeanor. He produced some more hot chocolate for the two of them from his inventory and handed her the hot chocolate. He revealed that he did not need his special abilities, as she had revealed it all through her own expressions. Dako was unsure how to react to the protagonist's concern. She calmed down, simply accepting the hot chocolate. Then, she took her very first sip of the warm drink, wondering if he was trying to comfort her. After the first taste, she said the drink was sweeter than she expected. But our protagonist asked what she would expect from a chocolate drink. She then recalled the observer she had met in the tower and revealed all of her thoughts to him. She wondered if her two other friends felt the same way. So many new ideas revealed by her had startled him. The beings that they had met in the tower existed just to destroy, in a relentless search for desires. He then questioned the protagonist if he believed both the being and she had the same dark thoughts. Faced with this new question, the protagonist was startled again, knowing that he would not be able to answer her. She then answered for him. In essence, it was the same thing. She thought if the two were of no real help, she would have considered discarding them. Her dark words had frightened the protagonist. She knew that if she had been much more radical, she would have been led astray by the idea of picking only the best. She could have very easily abandoned Slight and the incompetent pink-haired girl. Dako blamed herself for the uselessness of the other two. She believed she should not have thought such terrible things. Our protagonist, not knowing what he should say, took another sip of his drink, searching for some inspiration, and after a brief moment, and listening to the girl reaffirm that that was her real thought. For a second, he chose to look at her and said she was naive as well. She then blushed and turned her face right toward him. She had revealed her most well-hidden thoughts. When she asked if he thought the other two really had talent, it was clear to her that he believed so. Meanwhile, the swordsman, in his own room, was looking at the new cup, while our protagonist was telling his friend all about their qualities, since he had a bad tendency to rely too much on his sacred sword. Meanwhile, Slight, in his own room, took the cup of hot chocolate, since Slight could not keep up with the new circumstances. However, the protagonist thought the same was also true for Rutschel, since she had a truly incredibly strong new ability. The real problem was that all of that great potential was being held back by her various internal struggles. If the two of them could overcome and correct all their weaknesses and their many flaws, he knew that they would become truly great fighters. So, he then tried to convince his new colleague that their hidden talents would greatly surprise them both. The silver-haired young woman tried to follow the protagonist's own thoughts, but she did not have the very same capacity. In silence, she revealed by clenching her own sides that she did not have the same faith in her friends that he had. The problem was that she did not believe in the others, but she had decided to believe in the protagonist. With that, he was at first very surprised. This encouraged him to then hear from her. If their two friends were to train, they would get stronger. The boy then suddenly stood up, saying if it was as he was saying, that if the duo could overcome their challenges and truly grow, she would have to admit that he was right. However, if the result was not to her own liking, he would have to take full responsibility. The protagonist did not like what she was saying about him having to take the full responsibility at all. However, the young woman then left him behind, with all of the surprise and the new doubts he still had. While she had jumped down, she warned him that if he wasted even a single minute of her time, it would be his own fault and he would be held accountable. However, she then said her goodbyes and asked him to meet up with the two naive people the next day. In the morning on the next day, an intense new battle was already taking place in the training room. Our protagonist observed the battle with a very distant look. Slight even tried to advance on his attack against Dako while they were attempting to fight with their bare hands. However, not even all of his great efforts stopped the girl from throwing him straight at our protagonist. Slight was now trembling on the ground, looking for his new friend in a completely opposite direction from where he was. As he was dragging himself toward him, Slight was now crying. While he was questioning the protagonist about what was going on, he insisted, because he was just the only one hit by that barbarian, who insisted on hitting him with so much raw force. When she then approached the two, snapping her fingers, she had scared them both even more. She said that they were all doing physical training, so it was very normal for some of the hits to be stronger. In a reality check, she reminded Slight that he was not like Ban, who had learned things very quickly. Slight then said that he would now need his own sword, but his friend, his new trainer, would not allow it. The blonde boy, now upset, asked the protagonist to just give him his sword. However, our protagonist insisted that he get it by his own means. Since he was now being trained by his new colleague, Dako, looking at Slight, he wanted him to just believe in them, at least for this one time, that it was all for his own growth. Reluctantly, seeing that our protagonist insisted so much, Slight agreed to this, lowering his head. He then stood up because he thought that this might mean something. He was now determined to trust them and to try. But the moment that they were preparing to start again, the encouragement was just a foot that was approaching his face. It was his own colleague, Dako, who had chosen to catch him completely off guard, after she had told him so many times not to do so. While our own protagonist was surprised by how fast his friend had gotten so close to Slight, he continued to throw her his hits to train Slight, who truly needed all the new reinforcement he could get. She thought that he should not just confirm with his own eyes, to feel the many new attacks that would come toward him. As long as he did not understand what was happening, she would just continue to attack him over and over again. She took the new chance to hit him more times and, angry, told him that he must keep an eye on his own posture. He needed to react much faster, not just with his own eyes, but he should feel where all the attacks were coming from. While the young woman continued to throw her provocations at Slight, our protagonist observed the fight with his own all-reading eyes. He then realized that, at the present time, Slight's own stats were unilaterally dropping down in real time. Normally, Slight was a true monster who could easily deal with Erector, but for some strange reason, things had completely changed. Now that he had the great need to avoid using his own sword, his own abilities seemed to not even exist. Still observing the ongoing fight, he thought that if such a great change was caused by the sword, then Slight's true condition might be worse than he had imagined. Meanwhile, the girl continued on with that very intense fight. She was not just launching her own physical attacks, but psychological ones as well. She needed him to understand, and quickly, always asking if the true Slight was not a person, but simply a sword. Even if he were to deny it one, or even twice, he continued to be hit. But now tired of his friend's provocations, he had then begun to react. Strange new power began to hit Slight's own body like powerful flames, and he tried to take the real initiative. For the very first time, trying to throw a punch in Dako's direction. This had left the girl completely and totally surprised. It was an explosive new energy in the young woman's own direction. However, Dako had dodged it just in time. However, one of Slight's new attacks caused a great wave of air, leaving our own protagonist with his mouth hanging open upon seeing what had just happened right next to him. Rachel also did not understand how something like that had happened. Everyone then looked, and the young blonde boy had become a woman. Her new curves were accentuated, and her hair was now quite long. The moment that Slight stopped hiding himself and gave up, what he was now suppressing was at last released. Dako observed Slight's new appearance and got very annoyed. However, it was at that same moment that the great power around Slight began to fulfill and to gather. It was an intense new glow and a light that came from his chest, making him have to writhe around in great pain. It was so very intense that he crouched down on the ground. While our own protagonist had run in his very direction, he was not able to do anything, as his silver-haired friend stopped him, telling him not to worry, because his new friend was just fine. She, while watching the boy return to his own original form, felt that he was not the real problem. But he was not easy to solve, either. Sitting on the ground there, he was with a look of pure disbelief. Approaching him and looking at Slight, Dako asked if he now knew what his problem was. And at this point, the confirmation came that she and Ban were right. Slight thought that he could not continue on this way, but he asked her that she continue to fight him. She gave him a very strange look before she accepted his request. She then said that, before that, the girl said she would need to apologize to Slight, because she was wrong. Seeing the young woman apologize to him, he was quite embarrassed and even scratched his head, stating that she did not need to apologize. Dako's own next words truly came to hurt him deeply, saying she thought he was naive and clueless, and not a complete naive, clueless person. At that same moment, Rachel pulled on Ban's own shirt, stating they should also train. At that moment, he did not pay any attention to the young woman. Our protagonist's eyes now displayed a strong, golden tone as he was observing Slight. From him, two new concepts were released, that of the demonic spirit and that of the sacred spirit. The protagonist did not know how such different powers could be in the same place. He thought that this could be the true cause. He even wanted to talk to his new colleague, but he decided that he would do it later. First, he would apologize to Rachel. The young girl accepted the apology, saying that it was fine, but she would like to train. He remembered, at the time, how she was after having transformed. She also thought that it could all go wrong, but she thought that he would figure it all out. He quickly then summoned his snake, knowing this was the only way he could restrict her, in case the transformation were to come. Even so, he had some great resistance, but the young girl was firm in her own conviction. She wanted to be able to control her own unique power, and thus be able to help all of her new friends. He decided to accept her new request. He went to the easel, where there were some wooden swords for him to choose from. After choosing one, he then threw it in the girl's direction. She grabbed the sword with a very curious new look. Unlike the great battle between Dako and Slight, our protagonist wanted he and the girl to find their own rhythms. He did not want the two to be the same as the other duo. And the pink-haired young woman understood his own reason. And when the two of them were already with their wooden swords, our protagonist then asked her if they could now start, while the young woman said she was going to do her very best. Something new had come to the protagonist's own mind. He thought that this was what he had always dreamed of for his life. At the university, the very peace of his youth, he had imagined. It would not be a chaotic fight of strong blows without any goal. They were all young men and women encouraging each other. Just simply thinking about that, our protagonist smiled with a slightly now flushed face, realizing just how truly lucky he was. The young woman, seeing that the boy was now thinking, asked him if they should now begin. As soon as the two of them chose to start, the cute, pink-haired girl unleashed all of her new powers, showing her own claws. 5 minutes after the beast showed her demonic side, the entire room was all dusty, like a very scared protagonist who quickly called for his snake. Eva, he asked her to become a chain and hold her, the girl. The chains again wrapped around the young woman's body, draining all her energy and leading to the exhaustion of her power. A short time after, her new power was dispersed, and she regained all her consciousness. You could see how very relieved he was. He now seemed to be falling completely apart. She ran to him, worried, asking how many times it had happened. He said that he had gone through that more than just 10 times. The young woman was very sad, regretting that she had left him so devastated in the way he was. But he did not want her to feel so bad about it. He gave her a very light pat on her head. He then showed her a very bright smile, and reminded her that he had promised that he would help. Still with his hand placed on the young woman's head, he stated that he was already well prepared for that. And at that very moment, the duo was scared when someone approached. From a silver-haired young woman's own face, you could see just how annoyed she was with the protagonist. You could see her look of contempt as she held Slight by his legs, angry because while she had been training so hard, the protagonist was talking very softly to the new beast. He was very surprised by her new comment. Rachel tried to defend the protagonist, and hearing that, Dako bent down and asked if she had any obscure intentions. Then she said that training with very scattered thoughts was quite rude to her own opponent. while the young woman, still sitting on the floor with her head down, feeling guilty, Dako took advantage to make her feel even worse. After all of that, our protagonist turned and saw that the young woman was depressed. Looking at the young woman, who was so sad, he noticed that she was very soft when it came to Dako. He knew that Rachel had not had enough time to take care of her own mental health. Even so, she was trying to do her very best. With all that in mind, he stated to everyone it was all fine. Dako was quite curious about what he was now trying to say. Answering her, he revealed that he had recently made a new request to the professor, so that when he left the floating island, he could take a rabbit, and the professor had accepted. Dako, thinking that he would then choose her, thought that his new request was great. But his next words broke all of her expectations, telling the pink-haired young woman that from that new moment on, he would be taking her with him. Not only was the silver-haired young woman quite scared, but the blue-eyed blonde boy did not like it either. Rachel could hardly believe that he had actually chosen her. The very next day, our protagonist went to a women's clothing shop. He was sitting on a bench while explaining some things to people. On the communicator, he had already stated that he was not going to spend the night out, that he would surely be back before the new day's dawn. Dako was furious while she was talking to that new duo. His own eyes widened as he then looked to his own side. The pink-haired young woman had now appeared. After she had changed into the clothes Ban had chosen, a white shirt along with a bright pink skirt. This gave the young woman a cute new look to match her hair. She then looked at the protagonist and asked how she looked, because she thought that she was showing too much of her appearance. He quickly put his own hand up to his mouth to cover his own smile of pure joy at seeing her. After that, the two then left the shop and walked through the streets. She was truly amazed by everything that she saw. The protagonist had crossed the busy street, calling out to her to walk just a little bit more, because there was more of a department store district. While she tried to follow the protagonist, she got herself lost in the middle of a large crowd. When she managed to notice, several people had already appeared. She tried to hurry, because at that rate, she would end up losing it. When she thought that she was now lost, someone had approached and had held onto her arm. It was Ban, who pulled her out from the middle of the crowd. He then apologized and said he had forgotten it was her first time in a place like that. Rachel blushed when she had heard Ban was holding her hand. He knew there were many crowds in the department store district. Quickly, he turned and hid himself, since his own face was flushed. Therefore, he also did not see that her own face was also flushed. The two of them now walked in a new silence. At a certain part of their own walk, they ate various new street foods, like meats and also crepes. They also went to a new candy store where there were stuffed dolls. She won a brand new penguin from Ban. Sometime later, they had run free, scaring away a group of white doves that flew away, making the whole scene much more beautiful. Rachel was having so much fun that she was now even blushing. The two of them were having a lot of fun. And then lunchtime had come. The duo sat down to eat, where he had asked the young woman if she was enjoying the new dishes, since they were all now made from monster meat. But for her, it was all very good. She thought it was all absolutely delicious. And for him, who was now eating that kind of thing for the very first time, he could see that it was better than he had even imagined. Rachel was completely amazed. She could not believe she was eating meat and walking around the city. While she was eating, her thoughts varied and her expression changed. He, who was eating a piece of meat right in front of him, noticed the great change in the young woman's own face. Seeing that she now looked quite worried, he asked her if there was something wrong with her, if she had not enjoyed the new food. But the true reason was different. She felt excessively excited after so many walks in such good places. He was surprised to find out just why she was so sad. She was now wondering if what she was doing was truly fair, as she did not even know if it would help with her own abilities. The protagonist pressed his own lips together, irritated and also quite annoyed. The very next moment, he thought it was important to show her the concept of worry, and he asked her to look at his own hands for a moment, telling her that the worry she was feeling was now taking shape. He said that up until recently, his own ability could feel the great fury in her. But now he said that it was all different. Just by spending some of their time together, he could now capture those own emotions. Rachel agreed with the protagonist's own words, thinking about the own problems they had. At that very moment, he thought that, finally, she could see the symbol above his hand. At that moment, the protagonist closed his own hand that held the worry, along with his own other hand, dispelling the very concept of worry. With a big smile, he showed her his own, now empty hands, stating that all her worries had gone away. The young woman was amazed by the new glow, dispersing like a group of tiny stars right before her own eyes. She was not just excited about the new glow, but also about the new words she had heard. when Ban had promised to always solve all of her problems. She, while hearing his own request, had agreed because she had found everything he said fascinating. It all had seemed like magic, as if it were becoming real. Our protagonist's head went back to remembering their last battle, when she had attacked him so very aggressively. The young woman then changed the whole subject. Speaking much more shyly, she said she wanted to meet the very best. Our protagonist was curious to know who Rachel was talking about. Of course, she was speaking about Dako Young. Rachel smoothed her hands in a very calming new gesture. She said that Dako could be quite scary, but it had seemed like she had liked Ban a whole lot, and he quickly disagreed with that. It was much more like she had treated him as if he were her possession, like a brand new sword. Rachel started to laugh when she had heard the protagonist's comment. She found the fact that he was comparing himself to a weapon hilarious. He did not understand why she was now laughing, since he had thought the new analogy was quite strange. However, she then said that she had felt quite relieved. Surprising our own protagonist, she gave him a very beautiful, bright new smile, while saying that she had thought he was an omniscient wizard or something. Our protagonist did not understand what she now meant, why she was getting so very close. While she was talking, she grabbed our protagonist's own hand, calling him to leave if he had already finished up his eating. Her own smile was now much more beautiful than it was before, showing that her own worry had really gone far away. She then said that, as a thank you for everything he had done for her on that day, she would then choose a new outfit for him. The young woman then walked ahead, all smiles, while he carried the purchases. Back inside the academy, Professor Yamina was in a new meeting in a dark room with her. There was also the camera robot that Ban had given to her. He seemed to be feeling quite pressured, but she asked him to hold on for just a little longer, because it would all be over very soon. Watching the recordings, one of the professors was now furious that information about the tower was now spreading. They were going to find out who had allowed them to climb the tower. He also did not like the inferior beings for their transgressions. A blue-haired professor then asked if there was any way to prevent this new information about the tower from spreading. Another professor said that there were no violations in the new videos that were shown. Even so, there were still a few angry professors. At one point, someone asked everyone else to be quiet. This new person made a point of talking to Professor Yamina. He said that it was clearly a new infraction, and he wanted to know if she had already thought about how she had planned to take full responsibility for it. Faced with that professor's new arbitrariness, she just stared at him, holding all her emotions firm, unlike the small robot that was next to her. Some time ago, Yamina watched the recordings made by the protagonist. She slapped her own face, realizing that they had really gone that far. When Ban had said he wanted to climb the tower and record a new video, there was no reason to oppose him. She even thought that it would not work, as she had already known that external machines and artifacts did not work inside the tower. And yet, Ban had ignored common sense, bringing new results. She then ended the footage that was shown by the little robot. Yamina was sure that Ban still did not know what was going on. It was not the fact that he had brought the recording from the tower, but the fact that Ban had created a new tool that worked inside the tower. Something very difficult. The complications did not stop there. He wanted to publish the new video on his own channel, because he knew that this new theme would attract attention. That very form of rebellion would make his own group gain more favor from the academy students, and she got a little bit worried about that. The information about the Great Tower, which they had worked hard to obtain, would be carelessly spread. She wanted to know if he would not regret it. However, he stated that hard work should be shared. Besides his filming robot, there was no other way to record new videos, so he would practically monopolize. He had planned to edit and remove some subjects, like the constellation. But before the new video was published, he believed that she used to be by his own side, and thought that his own progress would be incredible. It would have some major repercussions. But he had already known that, and it was just as Yamina herself wanted. Talking to him before that new incident would attract both big and also small people. So Ban had stated that he wanted to stabilize his own position, and he asked the professor if she did not think that she would feel safe taking care of them. She secretly smiled, not believing that he was so admirable. Responding to the new protagonist, she said that if he had wanted to feel safe, he should then avoid causing new accidents. She had already created very great expectations. She felt that the things that Ban had created would generate something truly immense. So she had then remained quite silent, and the professor in the meeting asked what she was thinking about. She resolved to become his staunchest ally, and so she confronted the professor. Capturing footage of the tower was merely a private venture. Thus, it was not their place to debate it. She acted completely oblivious to his accusations, as he tried to hold her accountable for this. The instigator, Professor Alex Cantoni, had been the one coercing the other professor, forcing her to move against her own pupils. He erupted in laughter, branding her a gorgeous fraud, his voice rising to provoke the other teachers. He questioned if he stood alone, feeling as though her words were just a ploy to shield the student. Then, the blue-haired professor commanded Cantoni to be silent. She was Talia Liriana from the Artifact Creation Division. She pressed Yamina, demanding to know of this student, claiming he was just another ordinary commoner. Yet, a different professor would not stand for it. Hailing from the Aura Combat Studies Department, he declared there were boundaries to such selfishness. He argued that knowledge of the tower belonged to the Academy. In that instant, she challenged the professor, calling his logic flawed. The true reason nobody had ever filmed the tower before was due to its energy block. Professor Cantoni cut Yamina off with a sly grin, concealing his true motives, demanding she detail the principles of the power. Yamina stood impassive, absorbing the loaded question. From across the great table, Talia interjected once more, boasting 2 centuries spent researching these phenomena. She knew for a fact that artifacts from outside the tower failed within its walls, especially recording devices. It was an established fact that no circuit could withstand the waves emitted by the tower. The deeper her studies, the more she was certain that external tech would always fail within its domain. Hearing this, Professor Yamina finished the thought for her, proclaiming that her own student had achieved it. This declaration left Talia far more intrigued, stating that was precisely what she needed to know. Who was this boy? Her annoyance grew, because he hailed from a world utterly devoid of mana, and this feat made it seem he alone was chosen. The instant those words left her mouth, a realization dawned on her. The artifact used to capture the footage was with Yamina. The blue-haired scholar's expression turned sharp, resolute, as she donned her gloves, demanding the artifact. Yamina swiftly clutched the tiny robot, adamantly refusing to surrender it. She stated she was told to present the device at the meeting, but this was an achievement forged by her own student. She could not permit anyone to touch it. The professors, one by one, turned against her position. Abruptly, a figure raised his hand, commanding them all to halt. It was the man at the table's corner, beside her. This man was the Academy's own vice president and the dean of the Constellations Department. Placing a finger to his lips with a faint smile, he requested that everyone quiet themselves, so the fervor of debate might cool, and they all complied. But then, after a brief pause, he shattered the quiet, addressing Talia by name. Instantly, the professor became flustered hearing the vice director's praise, applauding her devotion of 200 years to the research, and acknowledging she was a person qualified to judge. It appeared the artifact created by the boy was unique. The professor stammered, hearing the man's powerful validation. The vice director stated that this would be a very hard truth for the faculty to swallow. When the staff questioned the meaning of his words, he made a clear point of explaining. To summarize, the student had been acknowledged by the tower itself. After this shocking revelation, the professors were aghast to hear such a claim. Because the boy had entered the tower for a single day, a professor attempted to challenge him, calling his statements dangerously irresponsible, even for the vice director. But he was entirely unfazed by the uproar. Shrugging casually, he said they could believe it or not. He then added there was yet another reason he was special. So he turned to the student's professor to elaborate, asking if she would care to reveal more from the videos, so that the faculty could finally comprehend. The atmosphere grew even more tense, as they were incensed to learn the professor was hiding details. The vice director then announced he would tell them everything. He declared that he and his peers were the only ones to ever be chosen by the constellations. The professors saw the rage burning in Talia's eyes. She could not fathom someone had ascended the tower once. It was then that Yamina informed the vice president that she would initiate contact with the constellations. Student Achievement 2, answering the powerful man's request. He asked her to answer with absolute truth the question he posed. As vice president, had her 4 students all signed contracts with the constellations? She wondered for a moment why he was pushing so hard. Still, she revealed the honest fact. Not a single one had yet signed a contract, which sparked immense interest from the vice director, who made his move. Xenon informed all present he would now also consider Banyan, one and every student in Class 11 as his protégés. At this, the professors desperately begged him to reconsider. They tried to remind him that he himself had just said that not one of those students had a constellation contract. The vice director, seeing they failed to grasp it, made a point of clarifying for them. It was irrelevant if a contract had been signed or not. The critical element was that they were chosen by the constellations, which was undeniable proof they were extraordinary, leaving Yamina completely taken aback. After declaring that other constellations also desired them, he started to apply pressure on the other faculty. With that, no professor could dare refute Xenon's words, not even the venomous Alex Cantoni. So Xenon declared that he was the professor who mentored pupils chosen by the great constellations, and if Ban Yu-1 was indeed chosen, he would also become his student. Finally, he stared down the professors with his golden gaze. Now that the entire faculty had submitted, the vice director moved on and introduced the next topic. The lovely Yamina was deeply lost in thought, head lowered, realizing that this meeting was never to debate how to handle Ban. The vice president's speech conveyed the president's will, and he kept on speaking about the students. Everything grew clearer the more he spoke, touching upon subjects that confirmed his true message. He was delivering the president's warning, declaring that the professors could make their requests to probe the students' unique abilities. After hearing the vice director declare that Ban was untouchable, the professor stayed deathly silent until the meeting's end. After proclaiming he hoped they had understood and wishing them a pleasant weekend, the vice director vanished without a trace. Yamina exhaled in relief, never dreaming that her pupil would be granted such favor from the director. In that brief moment of respite, one of the professors sidled up to her, Alex Canton, asking her out for drinks at a nearby pub. He claimed he wished to celebrate the student's triumph. At that foul man's proposition, Yamina looked visibly sick with revulsion, but offered no reply, simply warping to another location. The other professors, seeing her reaction, hastily tried to placate Canton. The following day, a huge crowd swarmed our hero in the dining hall. Scores of people wanted to meet him. Everyone wanted to be Ban's confidant, even extending him a prestigious invite to the student council. The protagonist was stunned by the massive crowd and the overwhelming number of date proposals. Meanwhile, Doko gathered with her two companions. They wondered about the cause of all this chaos. Light explained the whole thing and asked if Doko recalled the channel. He confirmed that the channel had become a sensation. At this point, it was nearly impossible to find anyone who hadn't seen the videos. And yet, hearing this and observing his surroundings, seeing countless people watching the video Ban made, Doko mused that Ban's vision and powers were truly magnificent. However, Rachel, watching the entire spectacle, pondered Doko's response and the events currently unfold. Our hero placed his lunch tray on the table, asking what was happening this particular morning. Exhausted, he couldn't help but rest his head on the table from the sheer weight of everything occurring. The protagonist also wanted to playfully tease Light, saying he had countless fans and should be nicer to them. They were startled by a thunderous voice that seized Ban's attention. Someone was yelling that it was all a farce, to make a scene with completely fabricated images. Some boys were viciously slandering the protagonist's crew. They sneered in Ban's direction, saying that he should just wait until the next day, when all his pathetic lies would be laid bare. The antagonist then recalled that tomorrow was the day of his fated duel with Rector, the day he would battle the Stone Brute Rector. After hearing all the hateful taunts from those boys, he deduced they were the same ones who would root against him in the duel. Light also concurred with our hero's theory, while Rutiel offered her silent encouragement, wiping her mouth neatly after her meal. The silver-haired maiden said that he must respond in the best possible way, especially for all those who were watching and supporting it, and gifted him a radiant smile. The next day, our hero ascended to the arena, and the assistant professor was waiting there, informing him the duel would be broadcast to the entire school. If they both consented to the match being recorded and streamed live, they must sign the magical document appearing before them. To their shock, there were multiple cautionary clauses for the duel. If one combatant was disabled or chose to yield, the duel would immediately conclude. The brute approached our hero, proposing a last-minute negotiation. The protagonist, startled by this strange request for parley, thought the giant was a fan of the channel and had seen the videos. However, the stone man asked Ban if he was terrified, stating that he could still surrender. For that to occur, he would need to crawl through his legs and bark like a cur. Only then would he deign to accept the surrender. Hearing this, our protagonist was completely astonished. Although the match was broadcast to the whole academy, only 2 classes were physically present in the arena. The delinquents, who were part of Rector's class, were cheering for him. Despishing bon ortimo. who was crushed by the silver-haired maiden last time, watched the arena with an intrigued expression. However, his stare was not on the combatants of the fight, but instead on Daiko. She was with the other two, attempting to verify with light how the reactions were trending. He reported to the girl that the live stream viewership had already surpassed 10,000. Many viewers were cursing Ban. Daiko had anticipated this in the best case. The people who admired him from the videos would be few, so she hoped that now, while so many people watched, Ban would finally prove if he had the might to reach the summit. Our hero was mulling over Rector's vile words about the crawling and the barking. This caused him to secretly smirk. He never thought he would hear something so utterly pathetic. It was just so absurd that it seemed lifted from some third-rate melodrama. So he called out to get Rector's attention, and the brute gave him a look meant to terrify, asking if he had prepared that speech to provoke him. Rector mirrored the same mocking smile to our hero, questioning how long he could maintain his calm facade. The protagonist shrugged, stating that if he was faking it, then Rector should find out by facing him directly. With those words, the hero drew his blade and summoned the director in a defiant challenge. He was infuriated, grinding his teeth at the taunt. Now he was practically steaming with rage, demanding the assistant professor declare the start of the match. The assistant professor raised her hand high and proclaimed that it was now Ban against Rector, with permission finally granted. He almost instantly charged right at the protagonist, relying solely on his massive size to claim victory. Rector's heavy footfalls made the entire arena shake, throwing his enormous fist towards the protagonist, who remained perfectly motionless as the fists nearly reached him. He then simply shifted his feet, moving swiftly as his eyes stayed locked. Our hero inwardly commended Rector for seizing the initiative, but his blade moved, and he slipped past the giant, while wondering what Rector could do being so sluggish. Ban's attack struck his foe's face like crushing a piece of paper. With that single strike, Ban sent Rector to the ground, seizing the advantage in this battle. For a brief moment, he considered that to fight this stone, he knew it was best to utilize the reverse method. The protagonist and his friends met in the training hall the day before his fateful meeting with Rutil. They all impressed upon him that before mastering a technique, there would be trials and errors. Thus, he learned that when facing a new foe with a new attack, he must be able to deploy the technique then. Only then could he claim to be mastering the reverse method. After the theoretical instruction, he would move to the practical. The protagonist had a sword to try and block just one of the blows. Daiko. He quaked with genuine fear, but he understood that she was teaching him this method, so Rector could not even lay a hand on it. Our hero, upon using the technique just moments ago, knew this was true. Unlike Daiko, Rector was far, far worse, who managed to rise, still asking what had just transpired. However, before he could even process it, another vicious attack was sent in his direction, and Rector was forced down to his knees, while the protagonist watched. The effect transmitted by his unique technique. The instant before his attack made contact, the protagonist had infused his sword with a wave of pure energy. Thanks to this, Erectus's dense stone body transmitted the power like a shockwave, causing immense internal damage and leaving Erectus enraged. He even demanded to know how Ban was injuring him. The protagonist, crouching down to be at the same height as the giant, apologized and then told him to cease his complaint, staring directly into Erector's eyes. He said that if he did not wish to proceed, they could conclude it there. Those words made Erector even more furious. At the sheer nerve of such a pathetic human, he rose and charged full throttle towards Ban. But our hero was incredibly swift to evade. Rector was livid. He couldn't accept that a stray from a lesser dimension was daring to look down on him. Rector bellowed these words in fury. The more he raged, the more it grated on our hero's ears, who understood what was coming after those howls. Several concepts materialized around Rector's massive arm. They were stretched grotesquely upwards, becoming far larger. Rector's hand smashed the arena floor, causant a deafening explosion. Even so, the protagonist internally scoffed at Rector, thinking he was far too simple-minded. He thought he should at least attempt a different tactic after it failed so spectacularly the first time. He didn't care about any kind of strategy. His eyes burned with the fury he was barely containing. He tried to pulverize our hero with his enormous body. Luckily, Ban was quick to sidestep his assaults. Rector continued his predictable attack pattern, extending his hand, trying to crush the protagonist. However, the hero's blade sliced quickly when infused with concepts. The huge stone arm began to fracture, and now it was being carved by the hero's attack. Faced with so many identical assaults, Ban had no other choice but to counterattack in the exact same way as the first time. Receiving devastating damage, Rector screamed in a mix of pain and fury while the battle was taking place. Countless people were watching and following the live broadcast. Among them, even the directors were keeping a close watch on what was happening. Even for such an insignificant fight, he was observing just like the vice director. Several people were watching in awe and couldn't believe what was truly transpiring. Light told the pink-haired maiden that everyone's reaction was to be expected. They refused to believe it, even seeing it with their own eyes. Now everyone was forced to accept that. Compared to when he first appeared at the academy, the protagonist was exponentially stronger. And that was completely undeniable. The students of Class 1, the same as the rectors, couldn't believe their eyes, because their own classmate was being dismantled at the very beginning of the fight. Now, they were wondering if the powers shown in the channel's video could actually be real. Even the substitute professor was afraid to see how easily Rector was being beaten. He knew that a week prior, that boy was feeling utterly weak, so much so that he begged for a week to train. The professor had no clear idea what had occurred to the protagonist. In just a handful of days, while the professor processed the message he had received from the professor's assembly, our hero contemplated what to do. A rector was before him, completely unable to move. For him, attacking someone who could not even make a move was something utterly ridiculous. He stood for a moment watching him, hoping that he would somehow get up to continue the fight. While he was in that state of anticipation, he heard the professor, who had already raised his arm, proclaiming that the battle was concluded. The professor's announcement caught both fighters by surprise. It was the final decision of the observing professors of that match, and he declared the entire duel was over. While the professor was making his speech, Rector's eyes were blazing with pure hatred, since the professor was deeming him incapable of continuing to battle. Despite Rector's enraged protests, the assistant professor warned that the duel would end this very instant. Even as our hero tried to say something, the professor said that the objections of neither of them would be considered. Ban still clenched his teeth in frustration when the assistant professor commanded him to leave the arena. Deeply annoyed, but with no other choice, he departed the arena, grumbling and sheathing his sword. He was angered because he couldn't decide if he would win or lose. He was furious and deeply frustrated, but at the very least, he had not lost. The sorrow in his friend's eyes was apparent. As he was exiting the arena in dejection, he heard Rector call him an insect and demand he wait a moment, even with the assistant professor declaring that he was considered unfit to continue. Rector refused to lose to someone like that worthless insect, locking eyes directly with Ban. He wanted to end this shameful humiliation once and for all, even defying the professor's direct order. With that resolve, he charged at the protagonist first. That's when his arm grew sharp and spiky, shouting at Ban about his deadly intentions. The assistant professor was terrified, screaming for Ban Yuan to dodge as fast as possible. He, however, simply readied his sword once more, unwilling to evade, even before Rector's furious gaze. He remained perfectly calm and still while the giant raged. He knew that his opponent had already been told to stop, but even so, he would not yield. He thought he was superior due to his dimension. He thought he was untouchable and didn't need to follow the rules. With that thought, Ban infused several concepts into his blade. Observing everything carefully, Ban knew the fight had only been paused at the professor's win, and now that man was driven solely by his wounded pride. So he raised his sword high and was prepared to end everything as swiftly as possible, now with his eyes glowing a different color, and with a resolve not witnessed before. He was ready. As soon as his opponent tried to land a blow against him, Ban just retaliated. Erector's eyes were rolling with rage and agony, and the protagonist thought he had done the correct thing. After so many vile insults, he would not be able to take anything else in silence. Rector only stopped his screaming when he realized what had occurred. After that single blow from the protagonist, Rector's entire arm had been severed. The people from Rector's class clutched their heads in disbelief, all with their eyes wide, completely unable to believe. Not even Ban's comrades believed what they were witnessing. Everyone began to shout loudly their various opinions. Meanwhile, a system window materialized before the protagonist, who looked at it with suspicion to see what it was. The system message stated that if he so desired, he could absorb the power of the monster from Rector's arm. In the meantime, The assistant professor was telling the stone man not to move. He would be transported to the medical wing. The huge man was collapsing on the ground, trembling and grinding his teeth from the overwhelming pain. Now he was paying the price of his arrogance. The assistant professor was administering the initial first aid, while the protagonist simply looked to the side. Now our hero was receiving a stern lecture from the assistant professor, who had already told him it was only necessary to dodge. The protagonist attempted to explain, offering an apology. Since the event happened so incredibly fast, it was very difficult for him to process. The professor was furious because the hero's excuse was pathetic. But while the professor was raging at the student, he received a notification that ordered the professor to stop. The vice director would provide him the answers he sought. Then the assistant professor displayed the vice director's message to Ban. The message greeted him and clarified that the person speaking was the chosen representative of the professors. He stated that from this point forward, he would pose the questions, and Ban must answer truthfully. He wanted to know if he was unable to dodge. The professor's representative warned that their powers were so disproportionate that even the professors chose to terminate the duel. Now, he demanded an answer from him that would be accepted by all, and insisted on knowing why he did not evade the attack. Our hero just stared back with a blank expression, offering no response whatsoever. The protagonist considered that despite having gained the ability, he had never truly considered what the so-called spirit words were. Now, with a question that gnawed at him, he felt a dreadful pressure from beyond the screen, and he wondered who that powerful person was. So, he asked the person on the other side how they had guessed, since he didn't evade the opponent's assault, and instead chose to counterattack. He believed that a student who defied the authority of the professors and acted as he wished deserved to face the repercussions. The person on the other side wanted to know if he was implying that professors were the authority. The protagonist confirmed and continued by adding that besides, in an official match where the rules must be strictly obeyed, this was paramount to stop other students from disregarding the regulations and attempting cheap shots. While exchanging these messages, the entire group of professors could hear all that was transpiring. He went on, saying if he had responded passively in that scenario, the notion that he was weak could have spread, and that the rules did not need to be followed. When facing a student from the lesser dimensions, it was not only the professors, or the director and vice director, who could have access to Ban's powerful words, but the entire academy. Countless people watched the screen where he spoke about the rules and about people from the lower dimensions. He continued by stating that even if he had chosen that attitude, in a short time, he believed his actions were totally justified. The vice director found it quite interesting when the student claimed that he acted to uphold the academy's core principles. The vice director realized that he was responding brilliantly, aware that there were many eyes watching him. He perceived that the boy had a superior intellect, as he had broadened the problem from 2 people to the whole school, also trying to respond with equal intelligence. The vice director said that the student's reasoning was sound, notifying that students who disrespect the match regulations deserve to be reprimanded according to the laws. However, punishing a student for a transgression was his and the academy's role, not something that a student like him could handle. The protagonist realized he was dealing with someone of equal, or perhaps superior, intelligence. The assistant professor smirked upon hearing Ban's exchange, and the vice director mused that whatever nonsense they spouted, his opponent was indeed formidable. With that, infringed upon the professor's sacred authority. He offered his apology, concluding that in any event, he would readily accept the judgment for his transgression. The vice director was clearly pleased by this response. The director declared that everything was fine, and that he never intended to discuss punishment at all. Those words brought our hero a wave of relief, but the assistant professor was rendered utterly speechless. Zenon, feeling he had grasped the situation, was convinced that this young warrior possessed enough charisma to earn the blessing of a constellation. He proclaimed to all that Ban Yuan's self-defense was just, as justified. These words made Slight and Rushel rejoice. The assistant professor even dared to challenge the vice director, who ordered him to stand down and cease his shameful display. Furthermore, the assistant professor received a harsh rebuke for failing to act appropriately with the students. He had not demonstrated the required resolve during the duel, and stated that the right arm was a trivial matter to resolve, closing the case entirely. A command was issued for the students watching the match to disperse and return to their duties. While the orders were being given, Daiko was relieved that it all ended without more chaos, and Slight wholeheartedly agreed with her. The director also stated that student Ban had shown great dedication and could depart at once. Displaying proper respect, he bowed to the assistant professor, who was seething with rage as he turned and left. He was turning to depart when he sensed something odd. The communicator still whispered, "Until we meet again." However, when he turned back to look, there was no trace of a message on the screen. Ban felt that strange phenomenon happening again after the whole ordeal. He rejoined his comrades, who were overjoyed to have him back. Light exclaimed the swordsman's final strikes were magnificent. Our hero said that this power must be a gift from the tower. Daiko praised him, saying she enjoyed watching him get stronger. She asked him how it felt to obtain a brand new power, and if he found it to be useful. A bit flustered, he scratched the back of his head, and he said that all of this was because she had trained him so intensely. Daiko then made the protagonist incredibly uneasy when she brought up the stone man's severed arm. She made him even more terrified when she said she knew he had absorbed its power. This forced him to recall his time in the arena. And the system message. He never thought it was possible. The system window displayed multiple new possibilities in which he could choose. For the sake of caution, he only took a small fraction, and when it succeeded, he thought the entire situation was unbelievable. He took a little piece of each, and saw that every single trait was immensely powerful. Until this very moment, he could not control the concepts of living beings at will. He revealed to his friends he could now take specific traits by severing them. His expression turned grim as he confessed that he had absorbed the might of his opponent's right arm. Daiko asked him if this wasn't a good outcome, and why he was acting as if it were not. He admitted that at first he was happy to grow stronger, but then he realized he was not battling the monsters from before. He confessed to his friends that after everything, he felt like a freak and deeply disturbed. The silver-haired maiden's voice cut through the air, commanding him to raise his head, because there was no reason to speak such foolishness. She reminded him that that brute had come at him with murderous intent from the very beginning. She told our hero that in a kill or be killed world, he must know what the correct choice would be. Those powerful words from his friend brought a small measure of comfort to our hero. Hearing her say that, he shouldn't feel any guilt for making his choice. After he calmed down just a little, he admitted he was overthinking and apologized to his friends. Daiko warned him he can't just go around severing the arms of those from his so-called special class. While the girls were bickering, he seemed to get a message that made him extremely worried, even letting out a cry. His shouts startled his friends who had no idea what was going on. In the face of his outcry, there was a mandatory additional class, which was the course on the constellations of Babylon, led by the great Professor Xenon. He taught how to gain support from the constellations effectively and how to negotiate contracts with them intelligently. This knowledge and training were vital to avoid the constellations' wrath. Now that course was being extended to all of Class 11. Everyone stared when the students from the lower dimension began to arrive. It was whispered that the bargaining boy was now walking around with his head held high, and our hero felt uneasy under all the stairs. While the protagonist and his friends ascended the grand stairs, they heard a flood of comments from people both for and against them. He, glancing back, saw that all his comrades looked deeply troubled and anxious about all the hateful comments. Making a cryptic and knowing expression, he told his friends that the more people were cursed, the longer they would all live. While walking, his wrist was suddenly caught by Rochelle, who seemed to need to say something important to him. She was worried about what had happened the previous day, and was afraid that more people would begin to despise them. Clearly upset, he said that everyone just said whatever they wanted, without ever knowing what kind of person he truly was. Seeing the profound sadness in her eyes, the protagonist tried his best to soothe her, saying that it was all going to be okay. Placing his hand gently upon her head, he asked her not to worry so much about these things, and he thanked her for all the care she was showing him. However, those who were watching them were not liking this intimacy one bit. Light and Daiko thought it was completely unnecessary. They had already gone out together over the weekend, and now they were in perfect harmony. Daiko asked the pink-haired maiden if she had loved the clothes she received that much. Russell, who always remained silent during the teasing, asked Daiko if she was perhaps feeling jealous. making our hero incredibly uncomfortable. Daiko grew angry and turned her attention to Rochelle, asking if she wasn't tired of getting beaten by her. Rochelle made it clear she knew the fierce young woman would continue to beat her down one way or another. Pausing at the door, they confirmed if this was the right classroom for the Constellations of Babylon class. Light was certain that there was a class here last week, but he didn't know what would happen if people like them mingled with the others. He was afraid of what the senior students might think of them, but our hero told them not to worry about that. Gathering his courage, he gripped the doorknob to open it and join the course. He replied back to Slight that everyone would think that talented juniors were joining them. But as he opened the door, even the protagonist appeared quite nervous by the number of people. All the students turned back as the door creaked open, seeming to stare down each and every one of them. Daiko thought that since they were older and more seasoned, even she could not dismiss their powerful abilities. The pink-haired maiden was visibly feeling intimidated. As was Slight, our hero also didn't feel at ease with all those powerful people surrounding him. Xenon, the moment he saw the new students, said that they from the legendary Class 11 were welcome to his prestigious lecture. The protagonist, when looking at the vice director, could not comprehend the true nature of his power. Nothing about the man was revealed, and when the man finally spoke, our hero realized that voice was the same as from the duel. Xenon began by stating that the origin of his lessons was to understand the tower itself and the great constellations. He told the people who joined the class on that day that he would first speak about the great tower. He started by saying that at first glance, it seemed like a massive structure with no principles or end. He said that the tower was no different from a living being. The class, for our protagonist, seemed to be a little boring. He explained that it might seem they were claiming their rewards for clearing the rooms. He said this was not what happened. It wasn't because they simply found some rewards, that the tower would gladly receive them. It did this to separate the most worthy climbers from the rest. And for these chosen few, it gave better and more wondrous treasures. There were also the transcendents. Like the mediums, that was a basic requirement for any intelligent being to be able to reason like a superior existence. It was a fragile system that could be turned upside down by one irregular intruder through non-standard pathways. All of that professor's long speech seemed like utter nonsense. The protagonist did not believe in any of it, although he did remain perfectly silent. He was always thinking about something. That was the moment the Chancellor's mass email was delivered. Our protagonist recalled that. This occurred shortly after the intruder breached the tower. What if he theorized that the irregular phenomenon with a massive spider swarm in room 4 had been triggered by the intruder? The problem was that the difficulty seemed bizarre in room 1 too. Those creatures that were definitely elite monsters. It was strange if the tower had started in this strange way after they had arrived in room 4, and the introduction had begun with that. The strange occurrences that happened in rooms 1, 2, and 3 could not be explained until now. With the professor claiming the tower could be a living organism, things seem to fit much better if you shift the perspective. It could be that the tower did not just change the difficulty, only because of the one intruder. And yes, because everyone had started climbing. This new solution seemed much easier. Now, he didn't know if the insane difficulty was really the tower thinking for itself and creating these difficulties. There was a moment when our protagonist's battle with his thoughts was so intense that the friends next to him began to take notice, as did the professor, who, though he said nothing at first, cracked a smile, thinking he was reaching his true purpose. The protagonist was already sweating from so much deep thought, but he still insisted, thinking that if the tower were a system, it would choose those people, just as Professor Zanin was saying. With that, he glanced to his sides and thought there was no better place. He thought that his class had encountered hardships and situations unparalleled to all the others. He thought that if so, the second phase would be even better with more gold, more events, and powerful magical items. He was pondering the concept of what occurred in the tower room when someone asked if he had already figured it out. The professor, having captured our hero's full attention, said that there was a barrier all around, and many students had not yet discovered it. And he congratulated Ban and Rutil for discovering an orb on the very first day of class. With that, he told everyone present in that lecture that Class 11 was fully qualified to continue in his lectures. Xenon raised his hand high, tossing something into the air. Then that poor violet orb gently landed. The professor said he had a question for the student, Ban, and he asked what he saw when he gazed upon that sphere. Ban, even looking intently, could see nothing because it was immeasurable or unknown. Being honest, he said he was not seeing anything at all. The professor urged him to concentrate a bit more and check again. Although our hero said he could not perceive anything, the professor insisted that he focus just a little more because there must be something there that he could see. Despite appearing to be genuinely trying his best, the words immeasurable and unknown were what he could perceive. He must try to uncover the secret of that orb. And for an instant, somehow his eyes widened. With that, he could see the core concepts of the orb's barriers, separation and protection. He said that besides those, there was something else he could not understand. The professor asked him to close his eyes and rest. The professor just smiled and thought that young student had discovered 3 main abilities of the orb, with the protagonist rubbing his eyes, looking drained and slight observing. Now he knew why the director was placing so much faith in it. Pointing towards the orb, Violetta asked our hero if he understood what it was. Being honest, Ban said he didn't comprehend it at all, which made the professor say that he was very candid. Xinon said he wanted to impress upon everyone the importance of expanding one's thoughts and stimulating imagination. He also said that if they wish to use their abilities in an advanced way, they must develop the true power of thought. The driving force is hidden within this. Now our hero didn't know what all that had to do with the orb. He wanted to know if someone with high cognitive capacity or imagination could actually control the orb. He agreed that, yes, and said that if one day someone had the ability to understand, analyzing and developing themselves, they would be able to expand that amazing capacity. Smiling and with a mysterious voice, the professor said that when that person managed to do that, the orb would transform them into a pseudo-god. Those words from the professor were both grandiose and chilling, and the students were staring in awe. But for our hero, everything continued to be very tedious. The professor insisted, saying that at the moment it might be difficult to grasp. He said that as the lecture continued, everyone would slowly come to understand. Finishing the lecture, he stated that their task was to try to imagine the possible applications of everything that was spoken, from the start to the end of that lecture. Our protagonist found everything incredibly complicated. He had a doubt if God was God. What would a pseudo-god be? He didn't know if it was something akin to a god or a false deity. His thoughts were shattered when Slight called Ban to leave, while Ban was asking someone from his class to explain the lecture, again, because he hadn't understood. Meanwhile, Slight said he thought our hero would summarize it very well, but his eyes were wide open ahead, seeing Ortema. After the initial shock passed, he managed to ask Ortema what he was doing there. The foul-faced young man said that he was the one who asked the questions. He wanted to know where she was, and Slight could scarcely believe that he was talking about their colleague. Suddenly, Daiko arrives, asking why everyone was gathered together. Smiling, she said in a sarcastic tone that she thought something serious had actually happened. Our protagonist, awkward and not wanting things to escalate, didn't know what to say. Ordema approached the silver-haired maiden and confirmed if her name was indeed Daiko. He said he had business to discuss with her. She continued to mock him, and she asked if he was making another duel challenge, saying that if he wished to harm her, she would not stop him. He clung to her, saying that dueling inside the academy seemed like something rather difficult. While she was speaking, the young man dropped one of his knees to the ground and told her that it was not a request for a duel. He produced a beautiful bouquet of flowers and offered it to the furious young woman before him. Leaving everyone stunned, Ortema asked the young woman out on a date. While he was blushing with deep embarrassment, the people behind him, with their eyes wide, never imagined that this scene was even possible. Just like them, the cold-hearted maiden also did not show her expressions. Nobody could believe that the proud and arrogant Ordoma had fallen for a woman who beat him to a bloody pulp. Our main character wondered what kind of taste someone had to have for that to be possible. Remembering that Ban himself had been beaten by Doko many times, Slight asked if he wasn't answering his own question. Being called a masochist in such a not-so-subtle way really got to our main character, who transmitted the same feeling to Rutil. Daiko was surprised that Ban didn't understand another man's heart, since she was about to ask what kind of scheme he thought Ortemo was plotting. Hearing talk of a devious plan, the three of them stared at Daiko with shocked expressions, making her realize they truly did not see the situation. Doka was certain that Orimoto was planning something, because his eyes held no trace of affection whatsoever. The main character had to disagree with Doku. No way. It doesn't seem like that's true. I mean, you're incredibly beautiful. The sudden compliment caught Doko completely off guard, making her blush, trembling with a mix of anger. Doko questioned how the dense Ban could say that kind of thing so casually, seeing that Ban didn't even grasp what he had done. Slight advised her not to fall for his devious tricks. While Doko was arguing with Slight, Rutil wondered if there truly was another reason behind that confession. She was worried about a certain expression he had made at that moment. With the man kneeling, Doko crossed her arms to dismiss him, leaving the man behind. She called her group to leave. It was then that Rucho looked at Orma out of the corner of her eye and was surprised because his face held a truly sad look on. During training, our main character received some new information. By exposing his presence to so many powerful beings, engraving his existence into their minds, Ban had unlocked a new concept of language, charm and honor, which were immediately elevated to 10 points. Our protagonist was completely surprised, since he had only just published a new video on the channel. Looking at the concept info, he found that charm could captivate and influence others, while honor stabilized dignity by being recognized by many beings. Even though he could not complain, Bon wondered how these two concepts could help him climb the tower. Ruchil, who was in front of our main character, was startled to hear him ask if his own face had changed in any way. Shyly, Ruth lowered her head to answer, "Oh well, I think Ban is very handsome." The main character choked with genuine surprise, stating that he wasn't asking in that way. On the other hand, Dako, who was hearing the entire conversation with her super hearing, was starting to get quite annoyed. Suddenly, Rochelle heard Slight let out a scream, who was training with Dako, and felt a powerful gust of wind hit her back. Stomping on the ground, Doko got the attention of the two who were flirting. Train. Focus on training. And when you're resting, just rest. Poor Slight, who after a beating was being carried by Doko. The main character also tried to ask Doko about his face, but the girl in a hurry slapped him on the face while blushing. "Seriously, didn't you just hear what I said? Focus on your training. If you keep this up, I'll make you two train until tomorrow." With Dako's threats, Ban and Rukul went back to train, while the tired Slight cried out for rest. Ban and Rukul started sparring almost immediately. As they exchanged blows, the two moved around the entire training room, using every inch of space they possibly could. Rukul's claws struck the main character's sword, and after images of pure energy were left behind, try to rest for a moment. Slight commented to Dako that Ban seemed much stronger, and was curious to know if he shouldn't stop focusing on dungeons and go back to the tower. Dako thought Slight was being too hasty. In her view, even if Ban had improved, he was still way behind Slight and the beast Rukul. She could tell that from the very beginning, the sparring between the two was only working because one of them, Rukul, was going easy on the other anyway. Dako remembered that the next day, they would return to the tower. She wondered if Ban had already figured out how to deal with the beast inside of Rukul, because otherwise, nothing would be different from the last week. Ban was also aware that if they didn't find a solution quickly, they would end up repeating what had happened last time. In the middle of his battle, he activated his all-seeing eye. Over the last week, he'd been observing ritual, which had helped him discover a few key things. Her violence was activated using any emotion as fuel, depending on which emotion was used. Her state changed quite drastically. When an intensely negative emotion was used as fuel, it burned hot until she lost all control. But when positive and calm emotions were used, the violence inside Rutil diminished and her emotions stabilized. Knowing this, Ban continued to fight Rochelle, to observe her even more and learn more about how her power worked. In battle, intense emotions were naturally amplified, making violence something that was inevitable. The more emotional fuel that was spent, the more aggressive Rukul would become. However, Ban wanted to try and change that fuel. He wanted to use something much more positive. The sparring continued until Ban gained an advantage and used the back of his sword to push Rukul, whose hair was now completely dark. The duo who weren't fighting watched the two's intense combat. Rukul had been pushed, falling to sit on the ground, and due to his tiredness, Ban fell to his knees. However, the fury in Rukul was at its absolute peak. Gritting her teeth, she refused to give up the fight. Seeing that it had come to this, Ban realized it was time to try and use his plan to show that he hadn't just been messing around these last few days. The main character held out his hand, creating a small magic circle. He was going to prove that the time he spent with Ruthie served to collect parts of her own emotions. whether she was happy, having fun, or at peace. Ben had not only gathered these emotions, but copied them directly from their very essence. Immediately, upon releasing the essences of joy, happiness, and laughter, Ben moved toward Rukil. Wielding such emotions, he hoped they would work. He directed them at Rukil in an attempt to make his friend absorb them. However, a single blow prevented him from getting close to her. In a fit of pure rage, Rukil managed to hit Ben's hand, which held all the emotions. Our main character was slightly startled. In front of him, Daiko was grinding her teeth very hard. The girl got up instantly, grabbing Ben by the stomach like a rugby player, and with the inertia of the movement, threw him to the ground, falling on top of him. Our main character felt the impact. Heavily mounting Ben, Rochelle had a demonic look. With a great roar, she attacked our hero with her sharp claws, immediately seeing the danger. Daiko and Slight ran toward them to prevent the attack. However, a chain was faster than the two of them. The chain wrapped itself around Rukil's arm, preventing her attack. A second chain appeared, grabbing her other arm and immobilizing her, so she couldn't attack him anymore. Seeing Rukil's strained expression, the main character was deeply worried, but soon realized that the color of her hair was lightened. When Rukil had returned to normal, our main character asked if she wasn't moving any faster after she transformed. Finally, Ben could finally rest, relieved to see that the beast in Rochelle was calming down quickly. Still, it could be dangerous to have to tie her up every time they fought. He couldn't help but think, if there wasn't a better method to calm her down, some condition for it. Pulling our hero out of his worries, Rochelle thanked him. Ben didn't understand why she was thanking him, since he hadn't completely solved the problem yet. However, Rutiel shook her head in a hurry and thanked him, because now she could at least fight for a little while. She already considered the improvement to be significant, and because of that, was happy to have him by her side. Ben started to blush at Rutiel's heartfelt words. Quickly, Daiko approached him, staring at him. Our main character was startled by Daiko getting so close, and had to make up excuses. We were working hard here. Didn't you see? While Daiko stared at the main character, Slight also approached, relieved that no one had been hurt. Daiko, however, thought there was something far more important. She started staring directly at Rochelle, getting everyone's attention, including hers, and worrying our hero. Daiko analyzed Rochelle for a long while, remaining silent, and then simply turned away. No, it's nothing. She decided to end the day's training there, so everyone could rest. Staying behind, Rucho looked at Daiko melancholically, with doubts and sadness. The next day, the group headed towards the tower. When they got there, Slight tried to ask Daiko for permission to use the holy sword, at least when they entered the tower. He was worried about the difficulty they were about to face, since this would affect the fate of the four of them. However, Daiko reminded him that everyone had agreed to create a solid foundation without any unnecessary rush. That was only their second exploration in the first semester.